Shikaku was experiencing a tornado of emotions. For a moment, he didn't understand which of those emotions he should focus on. Without a shred of doubt, Shikaku was extremely annoyed and frustrated. For 2 days in a row, his sleep was interrupted when there wasn't a need to disturb him. Jiraiya and Tsunade could have learnt from the Ambu ninja they sent to wake him that Konoha and Sunagakure had signed a peace agreement and Fujin's army was returning. And Fujin's information wasn't exactly urgent. Yet none of them bothered to convey the exact message to the Ambu ninjas and instead disturbed his sleep. Any normal person would have exploded in rage and given Fujin a piece of his mind. However, Shikaku wasn't exactly normal. Even lecturing Fujin was too much work for him, and he understood very well that it wouldn't have any impact on Fujin. Besides, there was a generational difference between the two, considering that Fujin was just a few years older than his son. Not to mention, Fujin's status in the village wasn't much different from the two remaining Sanins, so Shikaku couldn't scold him like he could a colleague or a subordinate. As such, he even felt helpless. At the same time, he was also curious about what information Fujin had gotten his hands on. He still wanted to know what had happened with the third Kazekage, and here Fujin was dealing with a matter that was as important to Konoha as the third Kazekage mystery was to Sunagakure. In the end, he could only sigh and collapse in a chair as he muttered, "What is it? Why are you looking into the secret reports of the Nine-Tails assault and the death of the fourth Hokage?" He glanced at the scrolls and said, "Besides, those scrolls don't have all the information recorded." Fujin replied, "Of course not. However, they cleared up the picture a bit. The previous Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tails was Uzumaki Kushina, the wife of the fourth Hokage. Considering the timing of the assault, the Uzumaki name, Naruto's birth date, his appearance, and the fact that he has the beast inside him, it's safe to say that he's their son, which means something went wrong during her pregnancy. Am I right?" Shikaku wasn't surprised by Fujin connecting the dots so easily. He simply nodded lazily. Fujin asked, "So what was that strange factor?" Shikaku answered, "We don't know the entire truth yet. The seal that contained the Nine-Tails weakens during pregnancy, so there was always a risk of something going wrong. However, Lord Third's wife and Lord Fourth were handling the matters personally. In addition, dozens of ambush squads were deployed, and a barrier was erected to ensure nothing went wrong. When the Nine-Tails assaulted our village, we thought the unthinkable had happened. However, we discovered some things later. Apart from Lord Fourth and Kushina, everyone else inside the barrier was killed by a sharp weapon, and the Nine-Tails couldn't inflict such small and precise wounds, so there was another aspect involved. We believe that the person or the group that attacked them were responsible for causing this accident in some way. Unfortunately, we never found out who was responsible. Since everyone involved was dead, we had no clue." Fujin didn't say anything and instead stayed silent as if he were analyzing Shikaku's words. Before he divulged any information, he looked at Shikaku again and asked, "And what about the Nine-Tails? Was he just feral or was he controlled by something? Or more specifically, the Sharingan?" Shikaku became silent. Since Hashirama was no longer alive, the Sharingan was the best method to control the tailed beasts. Everyone was well aware of this, so everyone was suspicious of the Uchiha clan. Even though Hiruzen didn't involve Shikaku in this matter, he was well aware of how closely the Uchiha were watched by the Anbu and the Root for years until the massacre. In fact, Shikaku also had several suspicions about the massacre, though he failed to confirm any. He sighed and muttered, "Once again we didn't find any explicit proof, but the Nine-Tails appeared inside the village very suddenly. It was almost as if he was summoned. So there were several suspicions, if you understand what I mean." Fujin nodded and said, "With this information I'm even sure of my hunch. I may have run into the very person responsible for that tragedy." Shikaku's pupils dilated and his eyes widened. Any drowsiness he felt vanished in the blink of an eye. Though he expected Fujin to say something similar, it was still shocking to hear. He immediately asked, "Who is it?" Fujin didn't answer and instead said, "His abilities are extremely strange and very dangerous. If I assume his goal was to hurt Konoha or steal the Nine-Tails, then I'm surprised that he hasn't tried again. He could have easily kidnapped Naruto or caused chaos in our village. He could have inflicted more damage on us than what I inflicted on Kumagakure. Yet there isn't any other known incident involving him." Shikaku's worry grew. He couldn't make sense of what that person's goal could be. At the same time, he wondered what abilities he would have for Fujin to rate him so highly. A shadow clone suddenly appeared next to Fujin, who immediately transformed into Abaido. Shikaku looked at the orange mask and asked, "Him, who is he? Did you get a look under the mask?" Fujin shook his head. "Unfortunately, no. I just noticed one thing." Once again, Shikaku was surprised as he saw a red design in the eye through the hole in the mask. He muttered, "A Sharingan, so it was an Uchiha." Fujin said, "Not an ordinary Sharingan, but a Mangekyou Sharingan." Shikaku sighed tiredly. Another Manjikaiu? How did you run into him? Fujin answered. As our reports said, we were led astray by Orochimaru from his main base. What the reports didn't say is that we found 2 members of Akatsuki hiding close to the area where we eliminated the Otagakure ninjas who led us astray. I fought Sasori and Deidara and would have eliminated them both if this man had not interrupted our battle. His ability is a space-time technique that allows him to turn his body intangible at will. My attacks simply passed through his body without hurting him. In addition, he also seems to have the ability to transport others and himself. It's similar to Lord Fourth and Second's Flying Thunder God, but is slower. Instead of teleporting, it almost felt like he was sucking them into a different dimension. Shikaku's expression became grave. He immediately understood how troublesome the ability was to deal with. Fujin added, with the ability to become intangible, the barrier would be non-existent for him. The Ambu ninjas deployed to protect Kushina wouldn't have a chance against him either, and he could control the 9 tails with his Manjikaiu Sharingan, so I'm almost certain that it was him who did it. It was Shikaku's turn to enter deep in his thoughts. For 5 minutes, he didn't say a single word. Finally, he massaged his forehead while muttering, "What a troublesome ability! I can't think of any counter. How did you deal with him?" Fujin answered, "Well, he can't attack others while he is intangible. Since I was surrounded by my wind domain, he would have to enter it and become tangible for any attack to land on me, which would have been no different from a suicide unless his body was as strong as the Reikage. Of course, I can't sustain my wind domain infinitely. However, seeing that he retreated, it's safe to assume that his ability has time limits or severe costs. He actually has another crucial weakness. His body has to become tangible when he's transporting himself or anyone else into a different dimension or whatever that it is. Even though it is only a fraction of a second, it's still a chance to hurt him." Shikaku thought and said, "It's still very difficult to deal with, but at least there's some hope now. Good work discovering this, Fujin. I'll see what arrangements I can make to counter his ability. Anyway, I take it that Sasori used a human puppet of the 3rd Keizukage." Fujin nodded. "He didn't give any information regarding it or reply to my taunts, but it's obvious that he has something to do with his death. I'm not sure if the Akatsuki was involved, but that's a problem for Sunagakure to deal with." Shikaku nodded. His mind was completely occupied by the mysterious Uchiha. He asked, "How did the battle end then? Did he rescue Sasori and Deidara and escape?" A smile appeared on Fujin's face as he answered, "Not quite." The look on Shikaku's face was a sight to see as Fujin continued. "I killed Deidara, though I couldn't secure his body. Sasori got away, but I got a few more of his puppets. As for this guy, I shot a vacuum bullet straight through his eye when he was transporting himself." Shikaku thought in disbelief. "He killed them both. No, something's off. Why would Fujin consider him a threat if he's dead?" As Shikaku expected, Fujin continued, "Unfortunately, his chakra suddenly underwent a massive change just before my attack landed on him. It almost felt like a genjutsu, but something he cast on himself. Even though I saw his dead body enter that plane, I have a feeling that he isn't dead." "A genjutsu cast on himself?" Shikaku muttered. He felt another headache as he thought, "Akatsuki. Everything about them is troublesome." He said, "That sounds like the forbidden Izanagi jutsu of the Uchiha clan." Fujin raised an eyebrow and asked, "Izanagi, what does it do?" Even though Fujin knew very well what that jutsu did, he hadn't encountered any scroll mentioning it. Hence, he could only feign ignorance despite being one of the most knowledgeable about the technique. Shikaku explained, "It's a very powerful jutsu that the caster casts on himself. It blurs the line between reality and illusion. It's quite complicated, and even I don't know how it works, so I'll just explain the effects. From the moment this jutsu is cast, any damage the Uchiha ninja takes is reversed when the duration of this genjutsu ends. Even if they die, they'll be back in the same condition they were in at the moment they cast Izanagi. However, it comes at the cost of an eye as they forever lose the eyesight of the eye that casts Izanagi." Surprise appeared on Fujin's face as he muttered, "That's an incredible jutsu. Even though the cost is high, losing an eye is better than losing their life. Is there any way to counter it?" Shikaku answered, "There is one jutsu which is called Izanami. It was created to counter Izanagi. Unfortunately, it was created by none other than the Uchiha clan and needs a Sharingan to cast, and it also costs the eye. So only Kakashi could use it if we knew how to use it. So the only available option is to kill them twice or thrice depending on how much they're willing to sacrifice. The only good thing is that they'll be much weaker once they lose both eyes, especially if it's the Manjikaiu Sharingan." "Did he have a Sharingan in the other eye?" Fujin answered, "Not sure. The mask was covered with dense seals, blocking all my sensing techniques. Since the mask only had one eye hole, his left eye should have an issue. Even if it were the Manjikaiu, he would only have one Manjikaiu Sharingan left in the worst-case scenario. If that was his only Sharingan, he's no longer a big threat. Unfortunately. Shikaku completed Fujin's words. Your instincts feel that isn't the case. Fujin nodded. It wasn't his instincts since he knew Abaido had normal Sharingan in his left eye, but it didn't matter. Shikaku wouldn't overlook the instincts of a ninja of Fujin's caliber. Shikaku sighed tiredly. He had another troublesome matter to handle. Even so, he was glad that Fujin brought this information. It was better to take precautions than be caught off guard by someone with such a troublesome ability. After thinking for a while, Shikaku asked, how do you think you would have fared without your wind domain technique? Fujin thought for a bit before answering. Not so good. I would have still been able to defend myself and counterattack, but my position would be very passive and vulnerable. A single mistake could have been fatal for me, while landing a single attack would have been an uphill task. Without a technique like Wind Domain, I'd consider him a greater threat than the third Tsuchikage and fourth Reikage. Perhaps only someone with a space-time mastery like Lord Fourth could take him head-on. Maybe Jiraiya-sama's Senjutsu could stand a chance too, but he'll be quite passive too. If Grandpa recovers completely, then he may have another way too. Speaking of him, is he up? Shikaku answered. Not yet. Still, you're increasing my headache further. An opponent of this level, if he was indeed the one behind the Nine Tails assault, then he's a huge threat for us. No, the fact that he is in the Akatsuki is already a big threat. Fujin said, now you know why I said he's a bigger threat than Orochimaru and Sunagakyo. Also, he wasn't a normal member of Akatsuki. Shikaku raised an eyebrow and asked, what do you mean? Fujin answered, neither Sasori nor Deidara recognized him. As you can see, he wasn't wearing their cloak or the ring either. It was when that plant-like member called Zetsu appeared and said that he was a part of their organization that those two trusted him. This should imply that he's one of their secret members, perhaps one of the founding members too, and we may need to take that plant-like being more seriously too. It knows more about Akatsuki than someone like Sasori, meaning it should be higher up the chain of command. Shikaku nodded and asked, exactly how many Akatsuki members did you battle? Fujin answered, I basically just battled two. This guy appeared after I had set up my wind domain and was about to trap them. He was more focused on escaping than attacking me. Zetsu didn't fight either and just escaped through underground once my wind domain closed in on them. Shikaku thoughtfully said, that's better. Still, it was too risky. You should have returned to the village immediately after the clash. His ability is just too convenient to assassinate. Your life could have been at risk if he attacked. Fujin replied, on the contrary, I stayed out longer hoping he'd sneak attack me. The reason I marched out to the land of wind, along with pressuring Sunagakyo, was to lure him out. I even left myself open several times. If he tried, I would have had an opportunity to kill him for good. Unfortunately, he didn't show up. Fujin sighed like he had missed an opportunity. Shikaku's eyes twitched as he thought, I should have guessed. This is in line with his personality. If someone is troublesome, the best way to deal with them is to kill them right away. Since he took such a risk, it seems he has the confidence to kill him again, so that's one possible counter. The only question is, how do I ensure that this masked fellow attacks only Fujin or Jiraiya-sama instead of others? I should also increase Lord Third's protection. If he had made a move against Lord Third, our arrangements would have fallen short. His chain of thoughts was broken when Fujin asked, anyway, why hasn't he healed by now? Did they still not return? Shikaku sighed and answered, they returned just yesterday. Lady Tsunade is experimenting in the torture and interrogation department to prepare for healing Lord Third's soul. The process is quite risky and she doesn't want to take any risks. Fujin placed his chin on his palm as he thought for a bit. He muttered, I didn't think it'd be so complicated. I'll give her a hand later. Along with helping the old man, it'll also deepen my understanding of the soul. But first, Fujin yawned, I need some sleep. Expecting his sneak attack, I haven't had a proper sleep in weeks. Shikaku's eyes twitched once again, this time in annoyance. Ever since the attack on Leaf, he hadn't had a single complete and undisturbed sleep. Recalling the ordeal Fujin put him through, he said, you shouldn't let your guard down completely. With his abilities, attacking you inside your house wouldn't be difficult. Fujin chuckled as he got up and began walking away. If he does that, then we can rest easy. Fujin couldn't care less if none of his seals could stop Abaido from entering. As long as he entered, he would experience hell trying to escape alive. As annoying as Abaido's ability was, he was no Hashirama or Madara. Fujin was fully confident in chasing him around for 5 minutes inside Konoha. Shikaku thought, so those seals are still under his control. Considering how many there are, I assumed he lost track long ago, keeping track of tens of thousands of seals. Too troublesome. Just as Fujin was about to leave the room, Shikaku said, don't forget you have to be present for the victory parade. Without turning around, Fujin replied, there won't be any more fighting or talking. Ask Hoka or Sensei to disguise themselves as me. Don't send anyone for me, I won't answer my door. Fujin disappeared as soon as he was done speaking. Shikaku muttered in annoyance, "He disturbed my sleep but doesn't want to be disturbed himself. Still, this is good. I still have time to return to my house and take another nap." As soon as Shikaku had that thought, an ambu captain entered the room and reported, "Shikaku-sama, Lady Tsunade said that the prisoners on death row may not be enough for her. She wants you to immediately work with Ibiki and decide who else can be experimented on." Without uttering a single word, Shikaku just stared at the ambu captain. "Shikaku-sama?" the ambu captain asked, puzzled at Shikaku's unresponsiveness. Shikaku sighed and thought, "They just won't let me sleep." Shikaku could only respond, "All right, I'll look into it. Tell her that I had asked the army to bring back bandits alive, so we'll provide as many prisoners as she needs." The ambu captain nodded and flickered away. Even though the rays of the sun fell on Konoha, the houses around the torture and interrogation department continued to be tormented by horrendous screams. As soon as he reached his house, Fujin entered the basement. Despite his returning to his home after nearly a month, a shadow clone was sitting at the center of the basement with a pot placed in front of him. Of course, no shadow clone could sustain itself for a month. The reason why there was still one there was that Fujin regularly sent shadow clones back to his house to keep an eye on Shukaku's chakra. Since the pot needed to absorb nature energy, he didn't keep it with him. With strong ninjas like Renjiro staying around him along with several Hyuga ninjas and other sensors, Shukaku's chakra would have been discovered no matter how careful Fujin was. Seeing Fujin, the clone dispelled himself and sent the memories and chakra back to Fujin. Fujin carefully observed the pot as he sighed. "It is way too slow now." As he expected, the chakra grew. "Unfortunately, it is way too slow." Fujin thought the rate at which it increased initially was still decent. "I had around 5% of Shukaku's chakra, and it increased by 20% in just 3 days, taking the amount of Shukaku's chakra in the pot to 6%. It took another week to increase to 7%. The rate dropped drastically after that, and I still have only around 7.5% of Shukaku's chakra. I have a feeling that even if I wait for over a year, the amount still wouldn't reach 10%. The drastic fall in its growth rate discouraged Fujin from waiting any longer. The gains didn't justify the amount of time needed. Fujin thought, "Anyway, the good thing is that the chakra didn't develop sentience. Even though the chakra is quite bale and I can feel Shukaku's hatred, it's not an issue since it can't think or act. There shouldn't be any complications with the seal, though I need to monitor whether the vile nature and hatred would affect me. Still, I wonder how much chakra is needed before it can develop sentience." Fujin thought for a bit but couldn't make an estimate due to the limited data with him. He muttered, "Leave it. The next time I target any tailed beast, I'll try to steal more chakra. It'll be a good way to learn how sentience can affect my seal." That said, Fujin turned his gaze back to the pot and decided, "I'm not sure how absorbing the chakra inside the pot will affect me. Regardless, it'll be suspicious that my chakra reserves increased so drastically in such a short time. Normally I wouldn't have cared. In fact, it'd be very difficult to even realize that. However, Tsunade is now in the village and I can finally explore that method." Fujin thought for a minute before deciding, "I'll explore her method first. No reason not to say yes to a free power-up, assuming there are no complications. If there are, then I don't need to explore that method now that I have this seal." Fujin let out a yawn. Realizing how tired his body and mind were, he decided to get a good sleep. Unlike him, Shikaku couldn't return to the dream world due to Tsunade's orders. Instead, he disturbed Ibiki's sleep, though Ibiki didn't care much about it, unlike Shikaku. The two immediately worked on deciding which prisoners could be sacrificed for the greater good. At around 8, the Konoha army finally returned to the village. Hoka disguised as Fujin and created a shadow clone to take his place as the army participated in the victory parade organized by the council to increase the ninjas' morale, motivate the students to train harder, and encourage the civilian population to enroll more children in the academy. The entire army marched around Konoha as several people flocked on both sides of the streets and cheered for them. It continued for several hours until they finally stopped in front of the Hawkage building at noon, where Tsunade delivered a speech before dispersing the army, except for the generals. The generals met up with the council members on the rooftop. Tsunade observed Fujin carefully and thought, "So he's the wonder kid. Not bad. His temperament looks good for someone who accomplished so much at such a young age." She smiled and said, "We finally meet, Fujin. I've heard a lot about you." Jirya added, "Good work, kiddo. Sensei would be proud when he learns what you did in the last few weeks." The other council members nodded in agreement as Hoka awkwardly wondered, "What do I do now? Shikaku-sama didn't say anything about fooling the council members and 2 of the legendary Sanins." Luckily for him, Shikaku suddenly coughed and said, "If you want to praise Fujin, you can do it later when he actually shows up." Several confused glances landed on him as some asked, "What do you mean?" They quickly turned their gaze back to Fujin as Hoka dispelled the transformation jutsu and his shadow clone and said with an awkward smile, "Sorry, I didn't intend to fool you." All were shocked to see that Hoka was disguised as Fujin. Jiraiya's eyes twitched as he wondered, did Fujin avoid the victory parade? Tsunade was taken aback too and asked, "What does this mean? Where is Fujin?" Shikaku answered, "He returned to the village earlier as he had to report some information. Right now, he's probably resting at home." Jiraiya thought, he really did that. Others were surprised as well. They had heard children bunking classes, but this was the first time they saw a commander-in-chief of the army bunking a victory parade. For a moment, no one knew what to say. Tsunade thought, skipping the victory parade, that's quite a way to make an impression. She turned her gaze towards Jiraiya as she wondered, "Why do I have the feeling that Jiraiya didn't tell me everything about this boy?" Koharu muttered, "Skipping the victory parade? How insolent!" She shook her head in disappointment. Hamura sighed and said, "Well, he worked a lot for the past month, so this can be excused." Koharu replied, "I know. Even though he made matters risky, the success of negotiations with Sunagakure can be attributed to him as well. That is why I didn't say much." "Shikaku, did he tell what happened with the third Keizukage?" Shikaku replied, "He did, but that isn't very important. There is another hidden danger to the village he discovered which is giving me headaches at the moment. Luckily, it isn't an immediate threat. I'll think of some countermeasures and discuss them later during a council meeting. It'll be better if Lord Third can wake up by then, as I'd like to discuss this with him too." Shikaku looked at Tsunade as he spoke the last sentence. Koharu wanted to ask how the third Keizukage had died. However, with Shikaku diverting the subject to a more critical matter which he refused to say as well, she couldn't force the answer from him. Tsunade said, "I'm still working on it, but I'll need a few days to start healing Sensei." Shikaku said, "That should do. Fujin heard that you were working on this and wanted to help. He'll probably come to you later." Tsunade asked, "Does he have knowledge of souls too?" Shikaku nodded. "He has some expertise, but I'm not sure to which extent. You can make the judgment when you meet him." Even though Shikaku and Hiruzen knew that Fujin had learnt the spirit transformation jutsu, it wasn't public information. As such, Shikaku didn't want to disclose it in front of the entire council. Tsunade was surprised by Shikaku's answer. She couldn't help but wonder, did this kid dip his paws into every aspect? That's not a good thing at such a young age, but Sensei must have a reason to let him diversify his skills to such an extent. Tsunade's curiosity towards Fujin increased even further. The very fact that Fujin defeated Orochimaru and led Konoha's armies to several outrageous victories had evoked her interest. She expected him to be an intelligent ninja, completely focused on training and fighting. She never expected him to have a deep knowledge of medical ninjutsu and souls, especially since he was already a grandmaster in Fuinjutsu. Tsunade said, "All right, just send him to the torture and interrogation department. I'll head back there and continue experimenting." Shikaku said, "All right. We'll focus on ensuring that Sunagakure honors the terms of the agreement. We also need to start a new recruitment drive to capitalize on the high morale of the citizen. With more children signing up for the Academy's entrance test, the number of students who get selected will skyrocket." He turned his eyes towards the two elders and requested, "I hope you too can focus on this aspect. Lord Third wanted to create a new elite force from the next generation to raise our strength to the next level, and this is our best chance. In his absence, only the two of you can handle such an important responsibility." "In his absence, only the two of you can handle such an important responsibility," Shikaku said to the elders. Needless to say, if the number of children who applied for the Academy's entrance exam skyrocketed, the workload would skyrocket too. They would need to recruit more teachers, expand the infrastructure, and implement the new schemes that Fujin had proposed earlier. None of the clan leaders were free to take such an undertaking. The only council members who had time to handle this were Fujin and the elders. However, Shikaku knew very well that Fujin wouldn't volunteer for this, so he could only dump it on the elders. Of course, the elders also understood what Shikaku was thinking. Unfortunately, he had phrased the question in such a manner that refusing would look very bad. Koharu replied, "Of course, we will take care of it. However, it'll be a lot of work for our old bones. We'll need the clan's support." Just like the elders, the clan leaders could only nod as well. As the representative of the civilian ninjas, this job should have fallen on Fujin's shoulders. Not to mention, he was the one who recommended the changes to the academy, increasing his responsibility further. However, he was still very young, and everyone on the council knew that Fujin prioritized his training over council duties. As such, they couldn't count on him in this matter. Of course, it wasn't completely a bad thing for most of the council members, and many were actually relieved. Ever since the Chunin exam started, Fujin's reputation and prestige in Konoha had skyrocketed. Kakashi, who was extremely popular and looked at as the leader of the next generation, had been left far behind by Fujin in this short time. Fujin's popularity had even surpassed that of the Sanins and was only under Hiruzen. If he started taking more responsibility in the council and increased his influence further, he could very easily start eating into their spheres of influence and perhaps their benefits too. If it had been a few months ago, they wouldn't feel so threatened. However, with the fearsome prowess Fujin revealed, they now understood that they wouldn't have an easy time protecting their benefits if Fujin decided to make a move. As such, they didn't want to see his prestige grow further by undertaking a task of such importance. This was the reason why Hamura and Koharu agreed without much resistance despite seeing what Shikaku was trying to do. They intended to use this matter to improve their image further and rebuild their prestige, ensuring their positions wouldn't be threatened under Tsunade. The group finally dispersed, but not before praising Hoka, Konomi, and Illumi for leading their divisions successfully and asking them to write and hand the reports to Shikaku. And then we went all over the place looking for Granny Tsunade. You wouldn't believe how much trouble Pervy Sage caused, always stopping at random inns and spending all our money on who knows what. But when we finally found her, she was super stubbo. As the parade ended, the village finally returned to work in high spirits. Naruto rushed straight to Ikaraku and enthusiastically shared his recent achievements with Im and Tuchai while enjoying his ramen when suddenly someone appeared behind him. Before he could turn around, he heard, "You sure are in high spirits, Naruto." Naruto quickly looked behind him and exclaimed, "Fujin, you looked cool earlier today." Without any change in his expression, Fujin nodded and sat next to Naruto while thinking, "Looks like Hoka did a good job as always. Maybe I could pawn off some of the council work on him too, something to consider for the future." That said, I'm more curious how his mission went. Even though Orochimaru might still have some capable subordinates, no one should be able to match Kabuto. Without him pushing Naruto, Naruto shouldn't have mastered the Rasengan and Tsunade shouldn't have recovered from her phobia. Or did things go down the same path as Naruto's battle against Gaara, somehow forcing the events to stay the same? Im said, "It's good to see you again, Fujin. Congrats on the successful campaign." Tuchai smiled and asked, "The usual?" Fujin nodded and said, "Yes, thank you, I missed this place too. What about you, Naruto? When did you return to the village?" As Tuchai prepared and served ramen, Naruto enthusiastically shared most of the details with Fujin. Even though Fujin's expression stayed the same, he was quite surprised. Fujin analyzed, "Tsunade took on Orochimaru by herself and won. That's strange. Surely Orochimaru hasn't degraded to a state where he can't even exploit her weakness. So what happened?" Fujin analyzed for a while before concluding, "No, he shouldn't be that weak. It means either someone, most likely Jiraiya, helped Tsunade, or she has already recovered from her hemophobia. If it's the latter, when did this happen? Was it also a butterfly effect due to some of my actions despite never having come in contact with her, or was it unrelated to me?" Fujin wanted to know the answer to deepen his understanding of the world and his impact on it. Unfortunately, it was extremely difficult to figure out. After all, Fujin wasn't supposed to know that Tsunade had hemophobia, let alone that it was cured, so he couldn't ask openly nor could he resort to tactics like reading her memory. Fujin turned his gaze back to Naruto and thought, "Anyway, he didn't manage to master the Rasengan. It's quite a surprise. I expected him to still master it somehow. Should I help him out, or should I see how things would develop if he can't master Rasengan?" Fujin thought for a few seconds before deciding, "Screw it. He has almost learnt the jutsu anyway. The rest is just a matter of clicking in his head. It'll happen sooner or later. Might as well help him now." Fujin interrupted Naruto as he said, "The Rasengan, huh?" Naruto nodded, "Yeah, the Rasen. What the hell?" As Naruto was speaking, a Rasengan formed in Fujin's left palm. Fujin didn't even bother to stop eating while creating the jutsu. Tuch and Im watched in awe. Naruto jumped from his stool and complained, "Why do you know my Rasengan, and how can you perform it so easily?" Fujin raised an eyebrow and asked, "Your Rasengan? That's Lord Fourth's technique. Even the pervy sage copied it from him. Anyway, the technique isn't too difficult to learn as long as you are good at chakra manipulation and control." Naruto muttered, "Chakra manipulation and control?" Fujin nodded, "Yes. Unfortunately, neither is your strength. So you'll have a difficult time mastering this jutsu if you take the traditional route." Naruto cursed, damn it, it doesn't matter, I'll still master it. Wait a minute, do you know an unconventional way? Fujin smirked and answered, maybe. Naruto immediately pestered, stop the suspense and tell me, Fujin. Fujin replied, sure, if you pay for my ramen for the next month. Naruto's jaw dropped. He never expected Fujin to put forth such a condition. He immediately argued, as if I can, you eat 8 bowls every time you show up. Wait, you're already on your 9th. Fujin nodded and said without a hint of shame, yeah, and I'm thinking of coming here thrice daily since you'll be paying. Naruto was left speechless. Poor boy didn't know what to say for a moment. Pretending to cry, he showed his wallet and said, come on, look at Gama-chan. He's so empty because I lost the bet with Granny Tsunade. He stopped and looked at Ayame. She finally couldn't control herself anymore and giggled. She said, he's just teasing you, Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened and he exclaimed, really? Fujin sighed and said, think sometimes, Naruto, you're one of the poorest people in the village. The only people poorer than you are the ones in debt and cannot pay it back. Why would I ask you to pay for my food? Fujin shook his head in disappointment. For a moment, Naruto didn't know how to feel. On one hand, he was glad that Fujin was only joking and he wouldn't have to pay a huge price. On the other hand, being reminded of his financial state dulled the joy he felt. Not to mention, he was pranked by Fujin once again. He slumped onto his stool and complained internally. He hasn't changed one bit, still messing with my head so easily. Fujin chuckled and said, well, don't feel too bad. You'll get a good salary when you become the Hokage. Anyway, the trick is rather simple, and it suits someone with a ginormous amount of chakra as you. Naruto's negative emotions vanished in the blink of an eye as he asked, what is it? Fujin answered, just use a shadow clone to assist in maintaining the shape of the Rasengan. You'll learn it in no time. Naruto's eyes widened as he visualized the idea and thought, that's right, with a clone's help I won't have to concentrate that much. He immediately exclaimed joyfully, thank you, Fujin. Fujin chuckled and said, just train later. Anyway, why were you so down earlier? Naruto asked in confusion, what do you mean? He was met by Fujin's steady gaze. After looking back for a few seconds, he averted his eyes and said, I don't know what you mean. It could be because I hadn't mastered the Rasengan or due to losing the bet. Fujin took his eyes off Naruto and continued eating. Naruto sighed internally when he heard Fujin's voice again. You suck at lying, kiddo. Spit it out. Fujin paused momentarily, but continued seeing that Naruto wasn't answering. Or you'll experience something that'll completely make you forget whatever was bothering you. Naruto shivered as he noticed Fujin's smile. He didn't doubt Fujin's words one bit. Naruto shivered as he noticed Fujin's smile. He didn't doubt Fujin's words one bit. While he knew Fujin wouldn't harm him directly, he understood that what awaited him would be a training session more hellish than any he endured so far. As he thought of what troubled him and how to say it, Naruto's energy unusually subdued and he slumped on the table. After a minute of silence, he finally spoke in a low voice, it's just, I don't get it, Sakura-chan. After everything we went through, after all that trouble to bring Granny Tsunade back to the village, she just ignored me. I mean, I fought my heart out and gave everything I had. And who does she run to first? Sasuke. She hugs him, cries over him like he's the only one that matters. Naruto stared absent-mindedly at the table as he continued, I know she doesn't see me like that, I've always known, but I thought after everything I'd at least get something. A thanks maybe, or at least a smile, but nothing, not a word, not even a look, like I wasn't even there. Ayame paused in her work, glancing at her father, who quietly continued wiping a bowl, both clearly listening but choosing to remain silent. Fujin didn't say anything either as he continued slurping the noodles. Naruto sighed again and leaned back. Whatever, it's not like I helped Sasuke just to get noticed, but it'd be nice to feel like I mattered even a little. Ayame smiled and said, of course you matter, Naruto, it's just that her mind was occupied by Sasuke because he had been sick for such a long time. I'm sure you felt relief on seeing him get up too, am I correct? Naruto replied with another long sigh, you are. But still, he turned his eyes towards Fujin, who always seemed to have a good solution, and wondered, could Fujin give me some tips to get closer to Sakura and make her forget about Sasuke? He might. He seems to know everything. I should have asked him sooner. Expectations rose in Naruto's heart as he waited in anticipation for Fujin's response. To his surprise, Fujin asked, you're done eating, correct? Naruto nodded as Fujin asked again, good, how old are you? Naruto answered with a confused look, 12. Fujin asked for the third time, do you remember what Itachi and his partner said? Naruto's expression became gloomy as he remembered their threat. He unwillingly nodded. Fujin summarized, so, if I understand correctly, you, a 12-year-old kid, are being hunted by 2 terrifying individuals from a dangerous organization, and you're more worried about being accepted by a girl who rejected you 1,000,000 times. Naruto could only whisper softly, hey, it wasn't 1,000,000. Fujin sighed and muttered, looks like Jiraiya's training was very lax. You have too much time to waste on such frivolous activities instead of training. A hand suddenly clamped on the back of Naruto's neck. Naruto's face instantly darkened, a sickly purple hue creeping across it as if all the color had been drained. Fujin said strictly, "Inform Sayaka and the rest that the break is over and to get back to training. I'll soon overlook your training personally." "Why, not again!" Naruto screamed as Fujin sent him flying with a flick of his wrist. Several people looked above to see Naruto flying and screaming once again. He flew all the way from the Ikaraku shop to the compounds and landed right in front of Sayaka's little group. Yuji looked at Naruto and sighed. "Again, what did you do this time for Sensei to send you flying?" Sayaka asked. "More importantly, why did he send you to us?" Naruto got up and dusted himself while saying, "He said that the break is over and to return to training. He'll look after the trainee. Why are you looking at me like this?" All 5 students of Fujin stared at Naruto. Hikari asked, "What do you mean that the break is over? We returned home less than an hour ago." Fujin's students were a part of his army. They actively fought in the land of rice. Even though there wasn't much fighting other than that, Banjiro had them participate in every combat exercise. He even took them for some bandit elimination missions in the vicinity of the army. Not to mention, they had just spent a couple of days running from the fire capital to the land of wind and back to Konoha with little break. They were hoping to finally sleep in their comfortable beds when Naruto dropped right in front of them and passed Fujin's message. Naruto asked in surprise, "Where did you guys go?" The kids caught up, informing each other of their exploits. When Naruto informed them what Fujin had said, all 5 slumped and followed Naruto to the training grounds unwillingly. As much as they wanted to sleep properly, none of them dared to disobey Fujin's instructions. From their experience, it was better to simply follow instead of enduring what would come next. In a corner in the torture and interrogation department, another set of prisoners were sitting silently outside a room. Everything about them screamed how terrified they were. By now, the entire department knew that something horrifying was happening in that room. The prisoners were about to resign themselves to their fate when they suddenly heard footsteps. They turned their heads synchronously, and their fear intensified even further. They thought, "Wasn't one monster enough? Why is he here?" The 2 guards respectfully said, "Councilman Fujin." Fujin nodded and asked, "Is Lady Tsunade inside?" One of the guards replied, "She is and cannot be disturbed until she appears out herself. However, it shouldn't take too long." Fujin rolled his eyes and muttered, "It should take a long time if she has to succeed. Don't worry, I'll wait here. Why don't you introduce these fellows in the meantime?" Shivers passed down the spine of the prisoners as they saw Fujin's innocent smile. Unlike Naruto, who was merely afraid of an intense training session, the prisoners understood that they would have to endure the cruelest torture proportional to the severity of their crime. As the guards listed their crimes one by one, some wanted to beg forgiveness, some wanted to curse their hearts out, and some wanted to wail in sorrow. Unfortunately, they knew it was pointless. No matter what they did, the Konoha ninjas seemed to take joy in their misery. They felt like Konoha wanted to see them break even before the torture began. Fujin didn't particularly care about their stories. His mind was occupied elsewhere as he thought, "I didn't think Tsunade would struggle this much to heal souls. I wonder if it's just a lack of practice or the insane nature of Hiruzen's injuries. Regardless, this is a good opportunity. Even though I learnt the spirit transformation jutsu, my knowledge of souls isn't very deep. With her help, I can finally fill the gaps in my understanding. This is also a good opportunity to build a good rapport with her, similar to the one I had with Hiruzen. Even though I no longer need the Byakugan seal, there's still a lot I could use her help for." Suddenly, the door opened and Tsunade stepped out. She was about to call her next test subject when her eyes fell on Fujin, who was casually standing next to the terrified prisoner. She smiled and said, "Shikaku said you'll visit me here." Fujin smiled and greeted, "Lady Tsunade, it's great to see you in person finally." Tsunade smirked and asked, "Oh, so you have seen me in other ways?" Fujin chuckled and said, "Nah, other than your bingo book entry, of course. I just heard several stories about you." He suddenly placed his hand on the shoulder of an unsuspecting prisoner and said, "Just now, he was saying a lot of things about you." The prisoner immediately snapped in horror, "Bullshit, I didn't utter a word." Tsunade looked at that prisoner meaningfully and said, "Why don't you come in? We'll find out what you said and what you didn't. Fujin, join us." No matter how much he screamed, the remaining prisoners saw him being dragged to hell by the 2 demons. Even though the gates of hell shut close, they could still hear his terrified screams. As the prisoner was laid on the bed and his movements sealed with more seals, Tsunade said, "Shikaku said you have some knowledge about souls. What do you know?" Fujin answered, "It's hard to say as I don't have much to reference against. Lord Third was the only one I knew who knew about it, but comparing with him isn't exactly fair." Tsunade agreed without any hesitation. She believed her knowledge in this area exceeded that of Hiruzen, yet she couldn't reduce a soul to his state without killing the prisoner. Fujin added, "In addition, my understanding has some gaps, so I won't be able to help you much in that regard, though I don't think you need it. Shikaku-san said that you were struggling to injure a soul to the same extent as Grandpa. Since I learnt the soul transformation jutsu, I might be better suited than you to cutting the soul." Fujin's eyes were focused on the prisoner, so he didn't notice Tsunede's pupils dilating. She thought in disbelief, "He learnt Dan's jutsu! He learnt Dan's jutsu!" Shock and disbelief appeared on Tsunede's face as she turned her head towards Fujin. She quickly hid her expressions and regained composure. Fortunately, Fujin was looking at the prisoner and not her. She thought, "I never expected this. Isn't he specializing in wind release? How did he learn Fuinjutsu, medical ninjutsu, and soul-based techniques at the same time? Also, why didn't anyone inform me?" Tsunede's emotions were complicated. It hadn't been long since she met Naruto, a boy with the same dream as Dan and Nawaki, and now she met another talented youth who had learnt Dan's jutsu. It had been over a decade since she returned to the village. While several old faces remained, she was seeing most for the first time. Yet a vague sense of familiarity remained through coincidences she never anticipated. She muttered, "I didn't expect you to have learnt the spirit transformation jutsu. Shikaku and Jiraiya didn't mention it." Fujin replied, I haven't used it openly yet, so very few know it and it's one of my hidden cards. It is a powerful jutsu. It's a shame that it has such a terrifying weakness." Fujin sighed. Several unpleasant and pleasant memories resurfaced in Tsunede's mind upon hearing his words. Fujin continued looking at the prisoner so as to not make things awkward for Tsunade, while thinking, "It's a pity that I'm not supposed to know a lot of stuff, including her relationship with Dan." Fujin added, "Anyway, let's continue. Is something the matter, Lady Tsunade?" Fujin finally turned his head towards her and noticed her complicated expression. Tsunade shook her head and answered, "No, I'm just wondering how best to use that jutsu. Did you witness Sensei cutting his soul?" Fujin nodded. "Yes, it was a blade made mostly of yin chakra. However, he did it in one swing. I guess I misjudged the complexity based on how easily he did it." Tsunade agreed. She had made the same misjudgment after hearing how it happened from Jiraiya. However, the complexity was mind-boggling. Tsunade said, "I'll first explain more about souls to you so that you have sufficient knowledge." While Tsunade taught Fujin, Naruto and the rest started their training. Without wasting any time, Naruto began practicing the Rasengan with the help of a shadow clone. Needless to say, he got it right on his very first try. His display attracted the attention of other kids. She muttered, "It's strong." Sayaka agreed, "If it hits us, we won't survive." Yuji asked, "What jutsu is that?" Naruto grinned and answered, "It's the Rasengan. Pervy Sage taught it to me." Hikari said, "You didn't say he taught you such a jutsu earlier." Naruto laughed and said, "I wanted to surprise all of you, so did you like it?" Shoma said, "It is powerful. That poor tree broke into half." Naruto chuckled. Sayaka asked curiously, "So, how was training under a Sannin compared to training under Sensei?" The other kids immediately became interested, and Naruto had to think. After half a minute, he answered with a smile, "Well, it was very different. His training wasn't as intense as Big Brother's Fujin, nor was it as hands-on. He just showed me some stuff and let me figure out the rest. It was very effective, and I liked it." His expression changed as he continued. "That said, he only taught me a single jutsu the entire time, unlike Fujin who teaches several things and makes us train all day. And I mastered the Rasengan now after a tip from Fujin to use a shadow clone, so I can't say Pervy Sage's method is better." Yuji added in a deadpan tone, "Not to mention, you got thrown here to train with us because you had too much time." The rest of Fujin's students chuckled as Naruto was depressed. Even though he hadn't been to war like them, he didn't have an easy time either. Even though Jiraiya wasn't strict, Naruto still trained till he dropped. While he had enormous chakra reserves and stamina, he wasn't in the mood to train after the little heartbreak. Yet, Fujin had shown him no mercy. The little group immediately started their training. While Fujin's students were curious about Jiraiya's methods, they were well aware that Fujin's methods were quite good too. The gap between them and other orphans had widened by a large degree over the past year. They were already strong enough to be considered chunins even without using their Kekkei Genkai. If they used their Kekkei Genkai with the element of surprise, they could even have a chance against Jounins despite being weaker. Tsunede's lecture continued for nearly an hour as Fujin's knowledge about souls improved drastically. However, some aspects remained difficult to grasp, and Fujin failed to understand them. Tsunade said, "Understanding this much on the first try is quite good. Your foundation on souls is good due to learning this jutsu." Fujin replied, "Yeah, but I won't be able to help you much if I don't grasp those concepts. I guess I just need some practical training." Tsunade raised an eyebrow as Fujin extended his hand towards the prisoner. Even though he hadn't been tortured yet, his throat was dry and he barely had any strength to scream due to screaming continuously merely out of fright. Considering his situation, one couldn't blame him. As Fujin's palm landed on his chest, a new wave of fright passed over him. Along with it was a sense of deep unease. It was as if his instincts wanted him to run far away from that palm. Unfortunately, he couldn't even move. While he didn't feel any pain, he suddenly started feeling emptiness, as if all energy was being sucked dry from his body. His eyes widened as he noticed white air exiting his body before his eyes closed. Tsunade exclaimed in surprise, "You can extract souls!" Above the now lifeless body of the prisoner, his soul was floating in the room. Tsunade knew it wasn't a part of the spirit transformation jutsu since Dan couldn't do so. Fujin replied, "I couldn't initially. I was inspired by the Reaper Death Seal, though my method is far from that level. It only works on neutralized opponents. Against higher-level ninjas, I won't be able to budge their souls even slightly, though harming them is still possible." Tsunade nodded. She could see that Fujin had to exert a lot of control to extract the prisoner's soul safely. In addition, the prisoner had already lost all willpower and barely had any energy. Fujin said, "Anyway, I should learn better by directly studying this soul." Tsunade agreed and began teaching Fujin once again. By directly inspecting the prisoner's soul, it became quite easier for Fujin to understand the concepts he couldn't grasp earlier. As Tsunade taught, she observed, "I can now see why Sensei likes him and has such high hopes for him. He has a similar curiosity towards learning and comprehension ability as Orochimaru. However, he has Minato's politeness. That said, he also possesses his unique sense of aloofness and indifference, which distinguishes him from Minato's gentle nature." Tsunade had seen how casually Fujin extracted the prisoner's soul. He didn't show any signs of hesitation or discomfort. It was not something someone with a gentle nature like Naruto could do. However, knowing that Fujin served in the Ambu for several years, and knowing how many he killed in the last month directly or indirectly, Tsunade wasn't too surprised. Especially when she considered that their goal was to heal Hiruzen, something that was far more important than the lives of a few death row prisoners. After Fujin grasped all the details, Fujin muttered, "That's strange." Tsunade looked at him as Fujin carefully analyzed Hiruzen's move based on the knowledge he just gained. It looks like several parts of a soul can be sliced without destroying the soul if it is done perfectly. Even the core can be sliced if some parts of it are preserved. So why did Hiruzen wait for such a large portion of his soul to be absorbed before slicing himself? Wait! Fujin suddenly realized. He waited so long before slicing his soul so that Orochimaru's arms could be sealed first. Otherwise, he could have substantially reduced the harm to his soul. Tsunade said, "Yes, Jiraiya had the same view. Orochimaru's improved Edo Tensei jutsu was too big of a threat to let him go unharmed. He could have just kept attacking and eventually the village would have collapsed. Unfortunately, even after such a sacrifice, his threat still exists." Fujin nodded. While Hiruzen and Tsunade knew Orochimaru more closely, Fujin was the only one who truly knew how difficult it was to kill Orochimaru for good. Though defeating Orochimaru was no longer a challenge for him, he was harder to kill than even Abaido. Fujin asked, so if the god of death had taken a moment longer to seal Orochimaru's arms, would it mean he would have missed that opportunity? Tsunade answered, "I'm not completely sure. My understanding of the soul isn't complete either. No ninja understands all its mysteries. Perhaps Sensei had a way to survive with an even weaker soul. We can only ask when he wakes up." Fujin wasn't too surprised by Tsunade's answer. The soul was extremely mysterious. Fujin was already surprised to learn that Tsunade knew which parts of the soul were responsible for maintaining consciousness. To an extent, Konoha had already learned about the basic features of a soul, which explained how Hiruzen managed to stay alive. However, there was much they didn't know about the soul. For instance, the soul was capable of reincarnating. Hagoromo had displayed incredible understanding in this aspect, be it the way his sons reincarnated across generations, or how the nine-tailed beasts could revive years after being killed. Fujin hoped he could mooch the same from him, just like how he was mooching off Tsunade, though he didn't have much idea about how to find him other than reviving Kaguya, let alone persuade him to guide him. Yet Fujin believed that even Hagoromo's knowledge wasn't complete. As he gained a deeper insight into souls, Fujin had a vague feeling that his understanding and mastery of the soul would play a crucial role at some point in the future. Tsunade looked at the soul and said, "Since you extracted the soul, slicing it will be much easier. Unfortunately, we kept his soul out of his body for too long. He won't wake up even if we put it back in his body. Can only practice slicing on this one before testing the next prisoner." Fujin agreed. Outside the room, the two guards and the prisoners were puzzled. Previously, Tsunade used to take a new prisoner every few minutes. However, Fujin and Tsunade were inside the room for several hours. The prisoners recalled Fujin's words and hope reignited in their hearts. They prayed, "Please, let them get what they want from him and let me have a normal death. I don't want to be tortured so inhumanly." Unfortunately, their prayers weren't answered as the door opened up once again and another prisoner was dragged inside. "Sigh, youngsters have no respect for the elderly these days. We just returned from Fire Capital and yet were made to work all day." Hamura sighed tiredly. They had returned the previous night after concluding the negotiations. However, there was still a lot of work left to ensure the terms of the agreement were properly implemented. Since the two elders led the negotiation team, Shikaku dumped most of this work on them. He only overlooked Fujin's deal. "It's not a joking matter. I don't mind doing work, but they're looking down on us. No matter how we ask Shikaku about the third Keisuke's death, he always changes the subject. He doesn't have any intention of passing the information to us," Koharu said seriously. They could ignore it when it was just Fujin acting aggressively. From their perspective, he was still very young and was unaware of the way politics happened. In addition, Fujin hadn't been active in politics beyond certain incidents despite being a member of the council. So he didn't harm their interests, unlike what happened with Danzo. However, Shikaku wasn't a greenhorn. If he maintained such an attitude, the remaining clan leaders would get a hint, and most would soon start treating them similarly. Both understood that they would lose their positions in no time if this continued. Even if they somehow hung on to it, their powers and influence would be severely curtailed, similar to what happened with Danzo. Neither wanted to see their influence erode. Hamura muttered, "It has barely been a month since Hiruzen was injured. I didn't think the next generation would find us an eyesore so quickly." Koharu agreed. Shikaku wouldn't have acted this way if Hiruzen was still at the helm. Even though they understood that he was a big reason why they held such power and influence in the village despite retiring a long time ago, they were shocked to realize how big of a factor Hiruzen was. Suddenly, both turned their heads as the door opened and an old man walked in with the support of his walking stick. Even though he looked feeble, neither of them considered him weak or helpless. Danzo looked at the expressions of his former teammates and said calmly, "You don't look well." Hamura retorted, "Not everyone has the luxury to hide underground even when the village is under attack." Koharu added, "I'm surprised you left your cave, Danzo." Danzo took a seat while replying, "We won, didn't we? Still, I'm surprised that no one pointed fingers at me." Koharu replied, "They're just glad that you aren't interfering. The clan leaders aren't that stupid to give you another opportunity, especially when Hiruzen is injured and the next Hokage hasn't taken charge. Even Fujin didn't mention you or your absence. Even though Konoha had an overwhelming victory against Sunagakure and Otagakure, it wasn't a cakewalk. Konoha had used nearly every available manpower. The clans and Anbu were fully mobilized. Even the civilian ninjas were mobilized once the battle began. The only two who were missing were Tsunade, who wasn't in the village and was believed to be suffering from hemophobia, and Danzo. As such, it was a good opportunity to point fingers at Danzo and question his loyalty. The clan leaders who had been aggrieved by Danzo in the past could have used it to attack him even more, yet not a single one did. The reason was rather simple. Unlike Fujin, who repeatedly came out ahead while locking his horns with Danzo, the clan leaders had suffered a lot. They knew how treacherous and cunning he was. No matter how they attacked him, they knew that Danzo would have answers to every question. In fact, he could even use this argument as a way to make a political comeback. Even if they could win the arguments and harm Danzo's reputation further, there wouldn't be much of a change. Danzo didn't have much influence anymore. What little power he held onto had no impact on them. Hence, they simply ignored his absence. Instead of giving him an opportunity now, they decided to save this matter for when he actively tried to make a comeback, blocking his attempts. Danzo realized this as well and understood not appearing during the attack was a mistake. Unfortunately, it had already happened. He said, "It's fine. I'll deal with it when the time is right. Why are the two of you so disturbed?" Since no one targeted him, Danzo had been left out of the loop. While he knew general information, he was in the dark about deeper details like what was decided in the agreement between Konoha and Sunagakure. Since the knowledge wasn't public yet, his subordinates couldn't obtain it. He was planning to be patient, but felt a sense of unease which he couldn't explain and approached his former teammates as a result. Neither of them had any reason to keep things hidden from him, and they informed him about the recent events. "Another failure," Fujin muttered as the soul crumbled once again. Yet there weren't any signs of discouragement in his eyes. Tsunade tiredly said, "Yes, but we managed to reach this stage thrice in a row. Another step and the soul will reduce to the same state as Sensei and I can finally start healing it." Fujin agreed. In the corner of the room was a large number of scrolls, each containing the dead body of a prisoner. In the last few hours, Tsunade had made rapid progress due to Fujin's assistance. They managed to reduce the soul to 33% of its original size while keeping it stable and were just one step away. Fujin was about to bring in another prisoner when Tsunade suddenly said, "Wait, let's take a break. It'll be easier once we are relaxed." Fujin didn't reject her suggestion. Though he could continue, they had to focus entirely on slicing the souls to avoid making a mistake. Doing so for a few souls was fine, but the two had worked on so many souls that Shikaku and Ibiki were getting worried. They even sent recently captured bandits who wouldn't have been given a death sentence normally. So Fujin and Tsunade were feeling mentally tired. Tsunade sat in a chair and asked, "So, why did someone so good at combat become interested in medical ninjutsu and soul-based techniques?" In the past few hours, Tsunade was completely impressed by Fujin's dedication and his ability and hunger to learn. Even though she had heard about him from Jiraiya, Shikaku, and Isamu, she felt like they were exaggerating due to how much he had accomplished at such a young age. From her experience, it was extremely rare for someone so skilled at combat to take an interest in such boring things. Even if they did, that would generally happen later in their life. There were two reasons for this. Other than being boring, fields like medical ninjutsu and fuinjutsu needed a lot of time to master. At a young age, talented ninjas would rather use their time to increase their strength than pursue these fields. They would only focus on these once they reached a major bottleneck and understood that their strength would no longer continue improving at a rapid rate irrespective of how much they trained. However, Fujin's thought process was quite different from Tsunade's. With a puzzled expression, he asked, "What do you mean?" Tsunade explained, "Learning these things takes a lot of time. Spirit transformation jutsu is just a single jutsu, so it's still understandable. However, medical ninjutsu is a very deep field. You need to devote a lot of time to become an acceptable medical ninja. It's the same with fuinjutsu. Why did you take away the time you could have used to improve your wind release or other combat-oriented ninjutsus further?" Fujin thought, that's what she was referring to. It's understandable. I don't think anyone else learned fuinjutsu and medical ninjutsu like I did. Fujin remembered the days when he used to feel like he needed 72 hours in a day. He had used shadow clones extensively for years to learn fuinjutsu. As for medical ninjutsu, he made nearly every senior medical ninja working in the Konoha hospital devote several weeks to guide him. It had been so extreme that even Hiruzen had become worried. Tsunade, who had just returned to Konoha, was obviously unaware of such information. Fujin smiled and took a seat as well. He said, "I never thought from this perspective. I always found fuinjutsu interesting. I used to read and practice it whenever I was out of chakra after my training sessions. It didn't eat into my training time apart from some instances. As for medical ninjutsu, my team once fell into a trap and we were almost wiped out. Only I managed to escape while carrying my injured team leader. It took me several hours to bring him to the Land of Fire and find a patrol camp where he could be healed properly. That motivated me to learn a few basic healing jutsus like the mystical palm jutsu. Other than providing immediate treatment to any injured teammate, the jutsu also has a huge potential to change the tides of a battle. I'm sure no one knows more than you how much of an upper hand you will have in a battle if you can heal yourself while your enemy can't." Tsunade nodded. It could turn a close battle into an easy victory if the ninja had sufficient chakra left. Fujin continued, "That said, you're correct. I didn't focus on other aspects of medical ninjutsu back then even though Yoshi-sensei pestered me continuously due to the limited time. I only accepted his offer after I reached a bottleneck in my wind release." Tsunade's eyes twitched. She thought so. Instead of resting after exhausting his chakra from ninjutsu training, he learned fuinjutsu while waiting for his body to regenerate chakra to train again, and he hit a bottleneck in wind release in his early teens. Did he do nothing except train? Tsunade felt like she got a small insight into the reason behind Fujin's phenomenal capabilities. She thought, I guess he has also been abusing multi-shadow clone jutsu to learn faster. Only that can explain his expertise in so many time-consuming areas. No wonder Sensei held him in high regard. Over the years, I have seen several geniuses, but he might be the most hardworking of them all. Even Orochimaru, despite his obsession with ninjutsu, wasn't this capable at such a young age, and seeing how dedicated he has been today, he still hasn't stopped training. A smile appeared on her face as she wondered, how long would he keep this up? While children had a greater drive to train, their motivation would decrease as they grew older due to the repetitive nature and diminishing gains. Once they received responsibilities, the time they could devote to training would also reduce drastically. Tsunade herself had barely trained in the last couple of decades. Similar was the case with most rank S ninjas. Cases like Guy and Orochimaru, who continuously trained or experimented to strengthen themselves, were very rare. Fujin continued, "Then again, I never thought of Fuinjutsu and medical ninjutsu as non-combat-based abilities. Both are more than handy in combat and complement my skills perfectly, not to mention the benefits don't end there." His answer intrigued her once again. She asked, "What other benefits?" Fujin answered, "When I was young and weak, I heard stories and rumors of how strong the top ninjas were. Back then, it seemed impossible ever to reach such a level. I couldn't even imagine how some of those things were possible with a normal human body. However, as I trained, my body somehow slowly strengthened itself to a level where I could compete with such ninjas. Since the change was gradual, I didn't notice it until I reached this stage, nor did I understand how my body went through such a change. Even though it has been a while since I reached this level, I am still amazed at times at how much my body has improved. It's natural to feel curious about this. If I study and understand my body better, perhaps I could find ways to continue strengthening myself. What better way to do it other than medical ninjutsu?" Fujin gazed at Tsunade, observing her body. Over her lifetime, Tsunade had been observed in such a way several times, one of her teammates being the biggest culprit. However, it was the first time she didn't feel lust or any sort of pervasive intent behind the gaze. Fujin added, "Forgive me if I'm being impolite. Despite your age, you look like you are in your early 20s. Nothing I see tells me otherwise, which is quite remarkable considering my sensory skills. I can feel that it has something to do with the mark on your forehead. I can sense that Fuinjutsu is somehow involved in it. However, it should be only a part of the technique. The main reason behind it must be your expertise in medical ninjutsu. Am I correct?" Tsunade folded her arms and placed her chin on her hand as she observed Fujin. She replied, "I'm confused. Should I feel offended that you called me old, flattered because you said I look young, or violated that you gazed at me in such a manner?" Though her tone was playful, her gaze wasn't. For the first time since they met, Tsunade was displaying her seniority and the fact that she would be the Hokage soon. Had it been someone else, they'd be nervous. Yet Fujin chuckled and answered, "That's an interesting question. I wonder what you'll choose." Tsunade raised an eyebrow and asked, "Are you testing me?" Fujin asked in return, "Do you want to claim that you haven't been doing the same?" Tsunade replied, "It's different. I'm your senior and soon will be the new Hokage. Of course, I'd want to know how the next generation is." Fujin nodded, "I understand. However, I had the fortune or misfortune of meeting your two teammates before you. Surely you'd understand my concerns." Tsunade was immediately at a loss for words. Needless to say, she wasn't truly offended and was merely testing Fujin to get a feel of his personality. However, she didn't expect Fujin to mention her two teammates. One was an open pervert who snooped around in bathhouses and hot springs. The other had lost his mind, betrayed his village, tried killing his sensei, and was doing weird experiments with his body. It wasn't unnatural for someone to make assumptions about her. Since she couldn't defend her teammates, she counterattacked, "Do you think I'm like either of my teammates?" Fujin smiled and answered, "Thankfully, it doesn't seem so yet. Talking with you has been rather pleasant so far." Tsunade smirked and said, "I didn't know you had such a silver tongue." Fujin shrugged and replied, "Now you know why I asked forgiveness for any impoliteness." Tsunade could only chuckle in response. While Fujin and Tsunade continued talking, the three elders were sitting in silence, contemplating how they should approach the future. Suddenly, Danzo asked, "You said Fujin is currently working with Tsunade, correct?" Hamura nodded. Danzo asked, "Don't you two find it strange?" His question surprised Hamura and Koharu. Fujin was working with Tsunade to help heal Hiruzen. Neither could see anything strange about it. Koharu asked, "What do you mean?" Danzo explained, "He has been at odds against the three of us from the very start for seemingly no reason. Yet he is cooperating with Tsunade without any such ill will. From what I heard, he also cooperated with Jirya easily, so it isn't something as naive as hating old people or people with authority. So why is it that he always stood against us?" His words forced Hamura and Koharu to think. A few moments later, Koharu muttered, "You're correct. I too wondered several times why he is so opposed to us. However, I could never come up with a definite answer. Even though there were a few smaller flashpoints, there weren't enough to make him act this way. Not to mention, he acted like this even before those incidents." Hamura said, "I've always been under the assumption that you did something to set him off, Danzo. Do you want to say that you never did anything to antagonize him other than deploying spies around his house?" Hamura and Koharu stared at their former teammate. While they always supported him, they fully knew of his nature. Neither would believe him if he said that he never did anything to antagonize Fujin given Danzo's track record. Danzo muttered, "I wouldn't say I did nothing at all. However, nothing I did should antagonize him to this extent against me, let alone transfer it to you too." Koharu directly asked, "What did you do?" Danzo answered, "When he started gaining fame in the Anbu, I had some of my ninjas keep an eye on him. However, nothing came of it. He took a lot of care to ensure he couldn't be spied on. You should know how many seals his house and the training ground opposite it has." Hamura and Koharu nodded. Everyone in Konoha who understood and could sense or see seals knew what monstrosity Fujin's house was. It had been subject to a lot of speculation, and Koharu had even tried using it to attack Fujin's reputation once, but was shut down by Hiruzen so quickly that Fujin never learnt of it. After that, none of the others in charge raised this matter officially. Even if something suspicious was happening, they knew Hiruzen was on board, so it wasn't their concern. Danzo continued, "In addition to seals, he was very sensitive to any spying attempt. Hence my spies had to retreat without finding anything. They weren't spotted by Fujin." Hamura asked, "Are you certain they weren't spotted? Seeing how suddenly he revealed his strength, he must have been hiding it for quite some time." Danzo answered, "My ninjas would have known if they were spotted. Even if I assume they weren't, linking them to me should be near impossible. They never act carelessly." Hamura and Koharu didn't doubt the capabilities of the root ninjas to carry out covert operations, but Fujin had given them surprise way too many times. Koharu said, "However, if they were, it would explain why he felt hostility towards you." "But," Danzo cut her off and said, "No, it doesn't. I still remember my first meeting with him vividly. Though he hid it very well, I could feel that he was on edge. I didn't understand it very well back then because we weren't supposed to have a history. Looking back at it, it is obvious that he was ready to kill me if I made any suspicious move. Simply being spied upon shouldn't result in such hostility. It was almost as if he had some deep enmity with me. Not to mention, none of this should tie to how he sees the two of you. Even though the two of you defended me, it shouldn't have led to him treating you with hostility." Koharu nodded. Hamura thought for a moment and said, "He isn't exactly hostile towards us. While it's true that he certainly doesn't trust us, he hasn't gone out of his way to target us. Any clashes we had were merely differences of opinion on crucial matters. In a way, it is similar to how you and Hiruzen frequently had opposing views." Unlike the other two, Hamura has a decent relationship with Fujin, mostly built during the times the two went together on diplomatic missions. Danzo frowned upon realizing, "Strange. His relationship with all four of us is different. He is extremely close with Hiruzen while being completely at odds against me. His relationship with Hamura is cordial while he is confrontational with Koharu. Is it just a coincidence, or did he purposefully do this? Was it an attempt to divide us?" Danzo's hunch was quite close to the mark. Fujin was close to Hiruzen because he needed his help to get stronger while he was hostile to Danzo due to the threat he posed. As for the two elders, he didn't care much. Unlike his proactiveness with Hiruzen and Danzo, he was more reactive with Hamura and Koharu. Since they decided to oppose him during his standoff with Danzo, Fujin initially planned to hammer both of them down. However, Hiruzen slowly but steadily gave responsibilities to Fujin. Fujin understood that he needed someone whom he could dump the responsibilities on. Since Hamura had been the cordial one and Koharu had been the aggressive one, he maintained a cordial relationship with Hamura while confronting Koharu whenever the opportunity presented itself. So, Danzo's hunch of Fujin doing so purposefully was on point. However, he didn't particularly have any intentions of dividing them and pitching them against each other. Fujin knew very well that the four old ninjas were too smart and cunning to see through any such attempts. Even though he ended up forcing Hiruzen to suppress Danzo, that was more due to Danzo's actions and Hiruzen's disappointment in them than Fujin's scheme. Koharu said, "Even if his relationship is more cordial with you, it still doesn't answer several of our questions. Since you showed up here, I assume you have already thought of the answer. Am I right, Danzo?" Danzo shook his head and answered, "Unfortunately, I don't have anything concrete. If something is wrong with him, he has done a very good job hiding it. However, I noticed something peculiar about him." Hamura and Koharu listened curiously as Danzo listed a string of Fujin's actions. They included the care Fujin took to ensure he wasn't spied on, the fact that he hid his strength for so long, his hidden battle with Katsuhiro, the two root ninjas who went missing while chasing him, Fujin's sudden interest in Naruto, along with other activities that Danzo found suspicious. Initially, Hamura and Koharu didn't feel much as not one of those actions alarmed them. However, as Danzo continued speaking, both Hamura and Koharu became serious. Koharu muttered grimly. Individually, not a single one of these events can raise a question about Fujin. They merely feel odd. However, there are too many such oddities. If we consider all of them, something is horribly wrong about Fujin. Hamura thought longer before adding, actually, even with all this together, it doesn't prove anything. These are merely suspicions. However, I understand you finally. Just like Koharu and Danzo, Hamura had a bad feeling. Though they didn't have any proof, they instinctively felt something was off. As veteran ninjas and politicians, they trusted their instincts completely. Danzo continued, there's more. He had been out of the village for some time and only returned on the day he met Katsuhiro for the first time. On that very night, my root bases were attacked for the first time. So, I had ample reason to be suspicious about him, though I didn't understand how he could possibly link Katsuhiro to me. A few days later, my headquarters was attacked by a massive lightning jutsu. Though we didn't know who it was, Hiruzen now believes that it was Akuro, the ninja who attacked Kumagakure recently. Weirdly enough, Akuro appeared in Kumagakure at the same time Fujin was in the Land of Lightning. I can consider Akuro attacking me when I was scheming against Fujin a coincidence. However, his attacking Kumagakure at the same time Fujin was eliminating their ninjas is just too convenient to be a coincidence. I feel like the two are connected somehow and possibly have a cooperative relationship. Unfortunately, this is merely a hunch too, and Hiruzen never listened to me. Both Hamura and Koharu were shocked. Koharu thought, as shocking as Fujin's achievements are, Akuro has been far more outrageous. If these two are working together, then... Koharu felt fear. Fujin's words threatening to kill her echoed in her ears. She believed Fujin would never dare to attack her despite their differences unless he intended to go rogue like Orochimaru. However, if Akuro could do his dirty work for him, then it was an entirely different matter. Koharu knew she wouldn't stand a chance. Worse, she understood that both her killers would go scot-free. Without any proof, no one would point fingers at Fujin. And Akuro's displays so far showed that no one could stop him from escaping or track him later. Finally! Fujin and Tsunade exclaimed in relief. The last step took a lot longer than they expected, but they finally managed to inflict similar injuries on a soul as Hiruzen had. Tsunade said, good work, Fujin. Now put the soul back in the body. Souls have to be healed while they're inside the body to avoid complications. Fujin nodded and followed her instruction. He slowly lowered the soul and used his yin chakra to manipulate it and push it back into the prisoner's body. However, just as he was about to do so, the soul crumbled and began dissipating. Tsunade wore a deadpan expression while Fujin awkwardly looked at the dissipating soul and thought, geez, that's embarrassing. I didn't think it'd be so brittle. He sighed. The soul was too weak. I didn't expect it to crumble from such a gentle nudge. Not wanting to embarrass Fujin, Tsunade said, it's all right, we still have enough prisoners. Fujin nodded. Another prisoner was unwillingly dragged into the gates of hell and had his soul extracted and sliced by two of Konoha's top ninjas. This time, Fujin was extremely careful. Instead of using his yin chakra directly, Fujin created chakra threads of yin chakra to manipulate the injured soul and pushed it back into the prisoner's body. Tsunade was surprised. She thought, these are chakra threads from Suna's puppeteering techniques. That's another technique that needs a lot of time and excellent chakra control. How much did he abuse the multi-shadow clone technique, and why didn't anyone stop him? It isn't safe to use that jutsu without any constraint. Before Tsunade could ask Fujin about it, the prisoner woke up for a moment. In that instant, he felt pain like never before. He lost consciousness even before he could open his mouth to scream. Even though he gained consciousness for only a fraction of a second, Fujin and Tsunade noticed it. Complicated expressions appeared on their faces. Fujin thought he smiled while feeling such pain. Sigh! Even though Fujin and Hiruzen had a very close relationship on the surface, Fujin didn't entirely trust him. He didn't agree with several of his policies and some of his past actions, among other things. However, as a ninja, Fujin had no choice but to pay the highest respect to Hiruzen. Tsunade said, you've done a good job, Fujin. Leave the rest to me. She took a couple of steps and stood next to the unconscious prisoner. Extending her palm towards him, she thought, I can't treat him as a test subject. I have to assume that I'm treating sensei. There is no scope for being complacent. She immediately pushed herself into a state of absolute focus, her mind shutting out everything but the task at hand. A moment later, she began healing him. Fujin's eyes glowed as he concentrated chakra in them and thought, healing souls that are harmed to this extent. Even Orochimaru can't do it. I doubt any other ninja can do this either. If I have to improve my understanding of souls, I need to know how to heal them. Just like Tsunade, Fujin entered his highest state of concentration. Though he didn't have Sharingan in his eyes, it didn't matter. Tsunade's technique was so advanced that seeing it with a Sharingan was pointless. The only way to learn it was to have incredible healing capabilities and a deep understanding of yin manipulation, yang manipulation, the human body, and the soul. Luckily, Fujin was one of the very few individuals who barely qualified across all aspects. Danzo glanced at his former teammates, who had gone silent and were wrecking their brains to calculate the implications of Fujin and Akuro working together and what they should or should not do. It went beyond just their interests or safety. If Fujin could make Akuro target Konoha ninjas to resolve his issues, he would be a major threat to the village. Of course, it was a big if. They had no proof apart from Danzo's hunch, and there was extremely limited information on Akuro to calculate and analyze properly. Not to mention, Hiruzen still showed a lot of trust in Fujin, which was another factor that played against Danzo's speculation. Danzo said, "If my speculation is true, then Fujin is a big threat to our village. We need to." Koharu interrupted him. "Don't even think of doing what you did with Shisui with Fujin. The fact that Hiruzen hasn't shared any details about Fujin with us must have to do with your independent actions against him. He doesn't want Konoha to lose another promising ninja due to your misconceptions." Danzo frowned and said, "Shisui's ability was a threat." He was interrupted again, this time by Hamura, who said, "Perhaps it was, but Fujin's situation is different. He doesn't have the ability to control us or the Hokage, and unlike Shisui, he's already the village's hero. If you take action against him without any proof, we won't be able to handle the backlash. The clan leaders have seen us as an eyesore for long. They won't give up this opportunity. You may be tried for treason while we'll lose our seats. Besides, Hiruzen may be soft, but he isn't foolish. Nor will he make the same mistake he did with Orochimaru. His trust in Fujin is more reliable than your speculation. We should wait until Hiruzen regains consciousness and discuss this matter with him. He is the best person to make a judgment." Danzo's frown deepened. He realized, these two have no intention of supporting me, at least not until I can get some proof. However, Danzo was in a difficult spot as well. His forces were extremely limited. He couldn't find anything on Fujin even when the route hadn't been restricted and had all their members. Doing so now was impossible. The only way was to plant evidence, something Danzo excelled in. Unfortunately, that wasn't easy either. The Ambu watched the route headquarters at all times, just like they watched the Uchiha clan earlier. They documented all the visitors and when the route ninjas left and returned. Hiruzen ensured that there weren't any blind spots, and Shikaku maintained the surveillance in Hiruzen's absence. So, planting evidence was very difficult as well, since the attention could be diverted to him and the route. Not to mention, he didn't have enough information about Fujin and what he had done as compared to Hiruzen and Shikaku, which introduced another element of risk. That was why Danzo needed the assistance of his two former teammates. Unfortunately, despite their differences, they weren't convinced enough to make a move against Fujin. Seeing the futility of continuing to talk, Danzo got up and said, "He may not have an ability like Shisui, but his partnership with Akuro is an equally great threat. Though he cannot control Konoha's leadership, he can eliminate it entirely with Akuro's help. Don't let your guard down just because he hasn't directly harmed you yet." Danzo's words lingered in the air as he walked out of the room. Though Danzo's words were grave and Hamura and Koharu didn't take them lightly, they didn't take them completely seriously either. As the door closed, Hamura sighed. "Danzo, he hasn't changed a bit. Instead, his paranoia has increased further. He has also become impatient." Koharu agreed. His words would hold a lot more weight if Akuro had killed any of our important ninjas. However, other than the attack en route, he hasn't interfered with our village. Even in Kumagakure, he didn't kill anyone in a leadership position. It is too soon to say what sort of relationship he has with Fujin, assuming there's one in the first place. Hamura nodded and added, "True. However, we need to be careful. With Fujin's tendency to hide his strength and his shrewd mind, it might be too late if we don't keep this in mind, especially if we plan on making him the next Hokage. We have to discuss it with Hiruzen as soon as he wakes up. Though I don't think he'll betray Konoha, the bad feeling I had earlier was too intense. Irrespective of what it is, something about Fujin is off. I just hope it won't be bad for the village." For nearly 3 hours, Tsunade worked continuously to heal the prisoner's soul. For the entire duration, Fujin focused entirely on observing how she healed the soul. Finally, Tsunade stopped radiating her chakra into the prisoner's body and let out a shaky breath. Her shoulders sagged as she straightened up, the strain of the prolonged effort evident in the slight tremor of her hands. Sweat clung to her brow, and her eyes were dulled with exhaustion. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and turned her gaze towards Fujin. Squinting her eyes, she asked, "Didn't find anything else to look at?" Needless to say, Fujin's actions were considered impolite. Most ninjas didn't like it when someone else observed their techniques so carefully with the intention of copying them. It was a different thing if it was an old man secretly peeping through a crystal ball, but others weren't usually provided the same courtesy. This was another reason why other ninjas didn't like the ninjas from the Uchiha clan. Fujin's eyes stopped glowing. He shrugged and replied, "What else could I look at? The only other option was looking at you." Tsunade raised an eyebrow and said, "You say as if it's an unpleasant thing." Without missing a beat, Fujin raised an eyebrow and replied, "Of course not. However, doing that for 3 hours would have been beyond impolite, don't you think so?" Tsunade's eyes twitched as she thought, "Is he turning this on me? Sai-sensei's shamelessness has rubbed on him too." Even though Fujin's actions were impolite, Tsunade wasn't offended. She was just teasing him but didn't expect Fujin to respond without a shred of shame or embarrassment. She sighed and asked, "Did you learn anything from observing me?" A helpless smile appeared on Fujin's face as he answered, "Yes. Healing souls is extremely difficult and complicated. To think I wouldn't have a clue after observing you so carefully for nearly 3 hours." Even though Fujin looked at her technique for so long, he still had no idea how to manipulate his chakra as she did to heal souls. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Even though Fujin was good at healing, yin release and yang release, Tsunade was at a whole different level. Fujin sighed internally. "I should have expected this. Had it been easy, Orochimaru would have known it too." After all, he had been her teammate for decades, and his mastery of yin and yang release is greater than mine. Though I don't recall him healing others, he has a jutsu that eliminates all his physical injuries. So even in healing, he might be better than me. Yet he couldn't do anything about losing just his arms. Fujin's gaze fell on the unconscious prisoner, and he recalled, unlike healing the physical body, healing the soul needs a lot of yin chakra while the yang chakra is negligible. However, the way she manipulated yin chakra, it's almost like the difference between a normal jounin using wind release and me using it. Tsunade chuckled at Fujin's expression. She said, "Learn to walk before you run. Healing flesh is merely a small part of medical ninjutsu. Even though you're good at it, you've barely scratched the surface yet." To Tsunade's surprise, Fujin nodded and accepted. "I'm aware. Apart from poisons and healing physical injuries, I'm no different from an ordinary medical ninja. Actually, I might be even worse off than them due to lack of practice." Tsunade thought, "Not bad. He hasn't let his success get to his head. At the very least, he's aware of his strengths and shortcomings and isn't afraid to accept them." Fujin added, "That said, this has intrigued me quite a bit. You haven't completely healed his soul, have you? Though it feels slightly more stable, it is still very weak. In fact, it hasn't even reached the previous step when we were slicing his soul." Tsunade nodded. "Yes, healing this soul entirely is impossible, even for me. I'm trying to retrace our steps and rebuild the soul step by step. According to my calculations, I can heal the soul by retracing a couple of steps, bringing it to around 2/5 of the entire soul. Any more and the soul will feel strain and could collapse just like the previous one did. The body and the soul will have to realign with each other once again. Once they're in sync, I could try to heal Sensei again. Unfortunately, that'll take around a couple of years to happen. Any subsequent healing will take an even longer time." Tsunade sighed and continued, "That's a worry for later. Right now, simply retracing a couple of steps is very difficult too. I'll need 3 sessions for every step." Tsunade stretched and muttered, "It's getting quite late and we have been working the entire day. I'll continue tomorrow." Fujin raised an eyebrow and asked, "Would it be fine to leave his soul like this?" Tsunade nodded. "Yes, the only problem is the amount of pain he'll experience. However, that isn't an issue since he's unconscious. While healing Sensei, I'll monitor him myself. As for him, I'll have other medical ninjas keep an eye throughout the night." She looked into Fujin's eyes and said, "Since I'll only be healing him tomorrow, I won't need your help. Do you still want to come?" Without any hesitation, Fujin nodded and answered, "Yes, though it won't be used commonly. This seems quite a useful technique, especially if I mess up while using the spirit transformation jutsu. I'd like to learn it." That said, Fujin paused for a moment before continuing, "I'm not sure if I can learn it just by observing you, so I was hoping you could guide me." Tsunade chuckled. "Of course you won't. All right, I'll give you some tips between the sessions. However, don't get your hopes too high. Even Sensei had failed to grasp it, while Orochimaru barely managed to grab some rudimentary healing technique. That is why he couldn't do anything about his soul. Even though your control over yin release is impressive for your age, you still have a long way to go." Fujin smiled and said, "Thank you." The two finally split up. Tsunade arranged for a couple of medical ninjas to keep an eye on the unconscious prisoner while thinking, "I can see now why Sensei took such a keen interest in him. He is talented like Orochimaru, diligent like me, and shameless like Jiraiya. Those are 3 of our best qualities. Though knowing Sensei, I'm sure it's his shamelessness that intrigued him." Tsunade chuckled as she wondered what the initial interactions between Hiruzen and Fujin were like. Meanwhile, Fujin returned to his house and thought, "Not bad, her nature is consistent with what I remember. Getting her help shouldn't be difficult, assuming I don't bother her when she's pissed. As long as Naruto and Jiraiya aren't around her and she isn't buried under paperwork, that shouldn't be an issue. The only techniques I'd struggle to get from her are the forbidden techniques and that seal on her forehead. Luckily, with my tetragram seal, I don't need her Byakugan seal. In terms of storing chakra, my seal is better, though I lose out in terms of healing. That isn't an issue either. As for the forbidden techniques," a sly smile appeared on Fujin's face. While Tsunade would become the next Hokage, Hiruzen was still alive. There was no doubt which one had a greater knowledge of forbidden techniques. Fujin had no reason to bother Tsunade with this matter, especially when Hiruzen would no longer have the duties of the Hokage and the two had such good relations. Luckily, Hiruzen couldn't hear Fujin's thoughts, or he may not want to wake up any time soon. The next day, Fujin and Tsunade began working again. Tsunade healed the soul for another 3 hours before taking a break and guiding Fujin. At the same time, Naruto and Sasuke finally clashed on the rooftop of the hospital until Kakashi stepped in and put an end to it. Jiraiya observed the clash as well and thought, he used a shadow clone to complete the Rasengan. Not bad, though it's rather inefficient. He isn't lacking in chakra. That said, I didn't expect him to throw it at a friend. Is something up between these two? Kakashi lectured Sasuke, who ignored it, instead paying attention to the small hole Naruto made in the water tank and smirked. He jumped off the building and was shocked to see the other side of the water tank, which further fueled his insecurities. Kakashi muttered, "Was it you who taught him that technique? Naruto is too young to handle it. He could have killed Sasuke, even against Akatsuki." Jiraiya immediately called out Kakashi's hypocrisy. "Look who's talking." While Kakashi explained the dynamics between his two students to Jiraiya, Sasuke left towards the new clan compounds of the Uchiha clan, still distraught about how much stronger Naruto's jutsu was. Unlike the original story, the Sound Four were already dead and Orochimaru didn't dare to send his remaining subordinates to fetch Sasuke. So after Kakashi had a talk with his student and tried to help Sasuke see what was more important, no one attacked him and manipulated him further. As a result, Kakashi's little lecture was slightly more effective. Sasuke gathered his thoughts before returning to his compounds. As soon as he did, several curious eyes landed on him. Moments later, several small figures rushed towards Sasuke. "Sasuke, are you all right? We were worried for you. What happened? Why were you admitted for so long? Was it that snake again?" The small figures were the orphan Uchiha kids who were spared during the massacre. Though none of them were a ninja yet, nearly everyone had joined the academy. Since he wanted to rebuild the Uchiha clan, Hiruzen had paid special attention to them, ensuring that they received the best possible guidance. Of course, even more attention was paid to ingraining the will of fire into them, to ensure that the new Uchiha clan never followed in the footsteps of the old one. Since Sasuke was the oldest and also the top student of his batch, he was the role model for all of them. Everyone wanted to follow his example. That is why the young kids were distraught when Sasuke was admitted for so long. Sasuke smiled and reassured them, "Don't worry, I'm fine. Are you training properly?" The young kids enthusiastically updated Sasuke on their progress. Their words distracted his mind from the turmoil he had been experiencing. Of course, that wouldn't be for long, as all their parents and older siblings had been killed by his brother, something he could never forget. However, before those thoughts could appear in his mind, an 8-year-old boy mischievously giggled and said, "Sasuke, you don't need to worry about the snake. I doubt he'd ever bother you again." Sasuke was puzzled. He asked, "What do you mean?" The boy continued giggling as he explained, "You didn't hear because it happened while you were asleep." Fujin wiped out Otogakure, and Orochimaru scurried away like a rat without daring to face him. Everyone in the village was talking about it for weeks. Sasuke's pupils dilated and his eyes widened. He was caught so off guard by the news that he couldn't hide the shock on his face. In his house, Sasuke sat alone in complete silence, his mind occupied by what he had just learnt. He couldn't believe what the young Uchiha kids said, and even confirmed the same with one of the Anbu ninjas watching over the compound. His shock increased even further. After a few minutes, Sasuke finally gathered himself and thought, "Orochimaru offered me the power to take revenge on Itachi. However, if he ran away without daring to face Fujin, can I trust his words?" The answer was clear. Even though Orochimaru had failed to kill Hiruzen, his performance was still very impressive considering he was in the enemy territory. Though the impression he left on Sasuke was lesser than in the original story, it was still very high. The cursed seal also subtly influenced him. However, that impression had now shattered. Orochimaru had failed to protect his village. There was no excuse that Sasuke could accept this time. Fujin had led an army and expelled Orochimaru from the land of rice. The fact that Orochimaru didn't even dare to face him made Sasuke lose all respect for his strength. He muttered, "How could someone who ran away from Fujin make me strong enough to kill Itachi? I doubt he can even kill Itachi himself, let alone give me the power to do so." That said, is Fujin stronger than Itachi? Sasuke immediately recalled that Naruto was guided by Fujin. His wind jutsus had come from Fujin. While he would never say it openly, Sasuke knew that Naruto's wind jutsus were formidable. Even though they didn't compare to his summoning jutsu, the supercharged wind jutsus were extremely problematic for normal ninjas. Sasuke knew he wouldn't fare any better than Gaara against hundreds of shadow clones spamming supercharged infinite breakthrough jutsu. Unlike the original story, where Naruto was considerably weaker than Sasuke until Jiraiya taught him how to harness Kurama's chakra and the summoning jutsu, the two were more evenly matched due to Fujin's interference. Sasuke had seen how Naruto's strength had grown steadily since the last year in their academy. His strength grew even faster once they graduated, as Fujin taught Naruto stronger wind jutsus and the body flicker jutsu. That was also when Sasuke learnt of Fujin's existence, though he hadn't paid any attention to him until Fujin forced Orochimaru to retreat in the Forest of Death. Sasuke couldn't help but wonder. The reason why Naruto, who was at the bottom of the class, suddenly improved should be due to Fujin. However, why did Fujin suddenly take an interest in Naruto and begin training him? Would he also be open to training me? Unknowingly, Sasuke had been completely influenced by Itachi. Unlike his other two students, Kakashi hadn't done a bad job with Sasuke. Other than Naruto, who also received guidance from Fujin and Jiraiya, Sasuke was the one who improved the most among his classmates. The rest couldn't even compare. Yet after meeting and losing that badly to Itachi, Kakashi's image had taken a heavy fall in Sasuke's eyes. At the very least, he didn't trust Kakashi's capabilities to make him strong enough to get revenge. Not to mention, Kakashi had lost to Itachi as well, just like he was. Since Orochimaru was no longer reliable, Sasuke subconsciously thought of the next option. He thought, Naruto lives in the same compound as him. I may be able to meet him there. Since he had nothing else to do, he quickly left towards Fujin's compound. He was about to reach when he suddenly saw Naruto and hid. He observed, he's hanging with those kids again. If I recall correctly, he had said that they are Fujin's official students. Naruto had returned to continue his training after talking with Sakura for a bit. Monkey, who oversaw their training in Fujin's absence, turned his head and noticed, Uchiha Sasuke, why is he here? Also, why is he hiding? Sasuke observed the 5 Kiri orphans and thought, weird, why are they of different ages? And why haven't they been enrolled in the academy and instead get trained directly by Fujin? He thought for a bit but couldn't understand. However, it didn't matter to him. Instead, he wondered how strong they were. Sasuke thought, this is a good chance to see how strong his students are. I can decide whether to approach him or not based on. Huh! Sasuke's eyes popped open as he saw one of the most absurd things. Sasuke immediately activated his Sharingan, but the shock didn't subside. He wondered in shock, what in the hell? How did they disappear out of thin air? It isn't genjutsu unless someone like Itachi casts it. No, even then I could sense that it was a genjutsu. What the hell happened? As Naruto and the rest walked into the training ground, they completely vanished from Sasuke's sight. He had never seen anything like that. He calmed himself and quickly analyzed. They disappeared right when they stepped into the training ground. Something is fishy about it. After contemplating for a bit, Sasuke walked towards the training ground to figure out what was happening. Before he could set foot in it, he suddenly heard, looking for something, Uchiha Sasuke. Startled, Sasuke immediately raised his guard and turned around. To his relief, it was just an Anbu ninja wearing a monkey mask. Sasuke replied, I saw Naruto and a few others disappearing while going inside the training ground. Monkey replied, this is the personal training ground of Suzuki Fujin. He doesn't like to be spied upon while training. No one can see what is happening in the training ground from outside. Sasuke thought in surprise, this is his work too, he quickly asked. How? Monkey answered, Seals. I'm sure you've studied about Fuinjutsu in the academy. Sasuke thought, Seals? Yeah, we studied about Fuinjutsu, but I never heard about Seals being able to do something like this. Seeing Sasuke silent, Monkey asked, Are you here to meet Naruto? Sasuke answered, No, I want to meet Fujin. Monkey replied, He isn't at home currently. Sasuke immediately asked, When will he be back? Monkey thought for a moment and answered, I can't say for sure. He returned quite late yesterday. If you want to meet him, you should come early in the morning. If you're lucky, you may run into him. Sasuke thanked him and left. As he walked back, he thought, Do all strong ninjas have a veil of mystery around them? With Orochimaru, it was his weird body, the snakes, and this curse seal. Fujin's Fuinjutsu is unlike I have ever seen before. And there's that bloodbath. The sight of blood raining down on the arena was still fresh in Sasuke's mind. It was horrifying, disgusting, and nauseating. He thought, I never guessed someone like him could cut down ninjas like grass. Perhaps he could help me get revenge. Naruto continued training, unaware that Sasuke tried to meet Fujin. As for Fujin, he spent the entire day again with Tsunade, observing her healing process and receiving her guidance. While he made no progress in learning how to heal souls, his knowledge of the yin and yang chakra deepened. Fujin yawned lazily as he woke up. Stretching his body, he thought, things will be boring for some time. Tsunade's experiments will run for 8-10 days more before she starts treating Hiruzen. Nothing else interesting is about to happen. Fujin sighed. For the last couple of months, he had been involved in a lot of interesting events, starting from his battle against Orochimaru in the Forest of Death and ending with the peace talks with Sunagakure. It had been quite a change in pace from his usual training routine. Returning to the monotony of training felt like stepping into a shadow after basking in the sunlight. Fujin sighed again before starting to freshen up. He thought, oh well, my continuous training sessions are the reason I could go undefeated during this chaotic period. I can't let my guard down so quickly. There are still enemies who are far stronger than what I faced, and I can't even think of the Otsutsuki clan yet. I'll have to endure several more years of such training. Besides, there should be some smaller incidents. The payment from Sunagakure should arrive soon. I can have some fun with it. Also, Orochimaru is supposed to take Sasuke, though I wonder how he'll do it. Most of his capable subordinates are dead. Surprisingly, Kimimaro also died against Darui and others. That said, I won't be surprised if he still has a few capable subordinates left. I only eliminated his bases in the land of grass. He should still have a few bases in other countries. However, even if the Sound Four were alive and healthy, he wouldn't dare to send them here. The Ambu in the Uchiha compound would have killed them. Even if they somehow captured Sasuke outside the Uchiha compound, there is no way they could escape the Land of Fire. Then again, this shouldn't be enough to deter Orochimaru. I wonder what he'll do now. While Fujin freshened up, Naruto saw Sasuke waiting outside the compound. He immediately recalled their battle the previous day and asked, Sasuke, why are you here? Sasuke plainly replied, I have some work. Naruto was surprised. He asked, what work? Sasuke replied, none of your business. Annoyed, Naruto snorted, HMPH, you must be here to see Fujin. Konohamaru, follow me, we'll meet him first. A tick mark appeared on Sasuke's forehead due to Naruto needlessly competing with him here. Konohamaru and his friends followed Naruto while shouting, wait up, boss! The four of them rushed towards Fujin's house and rang the bell continuously. Fujin, who had just grabbed a bite to eat, gazed towards the door and wondered, this boy, why is he so impatient at this hour? As Fujin walked towards the door, his annoyance increased since Naruto didn't stop ringing the bell. He opened the door and gazed at Naruto. Before he could say anything, Naruto said, Fujin, I finally see you. Can you train me like you said earlier? I want to improve my wind jutsus further. Sasuke, who had just entered the compound, was annoyed even further. Naruto asked what he wanted to ask before him. He didn't want to be stuck with Naruto again. Naruto looked at Fujin with hope in his eyes, but Fujin just looked plainly at him and observed, he sure is full of energy. Very well. Fujin said, it's good that you want to improve. However, your wind jutsus are already quite good. With Rasengan, the summoning jutsu, body flicker jutsus, multi-shadow clone jutsu, and some wind jutsus, you aren't lacking in ninjutsu skill. Unfortunately, there are other areas where you are lacking heavily. Being unbalanced in your skills can be a severe disadvantage, something your enemies will always take advantage of. Naruto was stumped by Fujin's reply. He hadn't expected Fujin to say something like this. He quickly asked, what areas am I lacking in? Without a hint of politeness, Fujin answered, your genjutsu skills and ability to counter it are non-existent. It is something you should work on immediately. That said, it's better if you make Kakashi work with you on this. The Sharingan is very good at casting genjutsus and will be the best at helping you build resistance against genjutsu. For now, I want you to work on the second area, your body. My body? Naruto asked in a confused tone. What's wrong with my body? Fujin answered, nothing on the surface, but plenty if you dig deeper. For a ninja, genjutsu, ninjutsu, or any other fancy techniques are secondary. The most important thing is how strong your body is. If it's weak, it doesn't matter what else you specialize in. Naruto, your body isn't weak by any means. It is probably the strongest among your peers. Unfortunately, you have little control over it. Your speed is too slow for your physique and you can't transfer your full strength in your attacks. If you don't correct this, forget about becoming the Hokage, you'll never become a strong ninja. Naruto became very serious. Though Fujin spoke plainly, his words sounded grave to his ears. He immediately asked, what should I do? Fujin smiled and said, relax your body. Naruto was puzzled but followed Fujin's instructions. Fujin placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder and said, I'll be busy for the next couple of weeks. Thankfully, I know someone even better than me at this. He'll be very willing to help you. Fear appeared on Naruto's face as he screamed, crap, not again! Konohamaru's gang nervously watched as Naruto's voice slowly faded away and he flew far away with a mere flick of Fujin's wrist. A shiver passed through their body as Fujin's gaze fell on them. He said, "Shouldn't you three be preparing for the academy? Why do I always see you hanging around here?" Konohamaru immediately said, "The academy is closed for now." Mogi added, "That's right, the vacations have started." Fujin replied, "Oh, well, there is no reason you three shouldn't work on improving your bodies. The earlier you start, the better it'll be. It'll also make your ninja games way more fun. Off you go." Before they could react, Fujin grabbed them by the back of their necks and flung them in the same direction as Naruto. Their screams faded away slowly just like Naruto's screams. Sasuke was shocked to see this scene. He wondered, what the hell, he just threw them like that, and why do they seem to fly? Wait, Sakura said something. He was spooked as he suddenly heard, "Shouldn't you be in the hospital?" He immediately turned around and questioned, "How did he get behind me?" He tried to answer, "I." Unfortunately, Fujin tiredly sighed and said, "Leave it, I'll send you there, don't run away this time." Before Sasuke could understand what was happening, he was sent flying just like the rest, though his destination was the Konoha hospital. As he flew, he wondered, what the fuck? I didn't even see him move despite him standing in front of me. How fast is he? Also, what are these winds? How can they forcefully keep me in the air? Sasuke activated his Sharingan to observe the winds. Even though he saw their flow, he couldn't understand how the flow was sustained. He could only let the winds hurl him across Konoha as his Sharingan noticed everyone below looking at him. Fujin turned his head and noticed his 5 students trying to sneak away silently. They stopped as soon as they felt his gaze. Worried they'd be sent flying similarly, Yuji said, "You don't need to throw us. We'll run after Naruto and do the same training that he will." Fujin was amused by their reactions. He said, "Oh, I didn't know you were so enthusiastic to learn from Guy. It seems like you have grown accustomed to my training plans. All right, I'll talk with him to see if he is free to train you. If you somehow survive, you may become splendid ninjas." A smile appeared on Fujin's face. However, neither his smile nor his words comforted his poor students. They shivered involuntarily, wondering, his training is more difficult than Sensei's training routine. What kind of monster is he? Fujin turned his head and said, "Monkey, make their training more difficult today. Ensure that they are ready to endure my guy's training." Monkey nervously thought, "Don't tell me he'll make them run around Konoha on their hands. Though it'll be good to build their character, we don't want them to be very popular just yet." For most people in Konoha, this morning was like any other. However, a few got to enjoy a strange sight. A man muttered, "Since when did ninjas learn to fly?" The woman beside him asked, "Are you sure they're flying? They're screaming their lungs out. Will they be safe?" The man had no answer. Luckily, an older man replied, "That's Uzumaki Naruto. I had seen him flying this way earlier. He should be fine. However, I never saw those 3 kids fly like this. Isn't that Lord Third's grandson?" In a nearby food stall, Jiraiya sat with his mouth wide open. He rubbed his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing things. He couldn't help but wonder, they are flying. What in the world? He squinted his eyes, concentrating chakra in them, and observed, what are those strange winds? It doesn't look like Naruto's controlling them. He trailed their flight path with his eyes and realized, isn't that absurd house in that direction? Did Fujin send them flying? He turned his head and noticed another person flying, albeit on a different path. He thought, that looks like Uchiha Sasuke. However, he's moving towards the center of the village. Why didn't Sensei tell me about this new way of traveling across the village? Though it'll be for a fleeting moment, I can do research from an entirely new angle if I can fly like that. I can get so much new inspiration from a new angle, and I won't even need to run away. Since it was Fujin's work, Jiraiya wasn't too concerned about their safety. He continued eating while imagining the advantages of such a technique. In a training ground, Team Guy suddenly stopped training and turned their heads as they heard a scream. Lee wondered aloud, "Is that Naruto?" Tent replied, "It is. How is he flying?" Neji observed, "Those winds, what are they?" The 4 saw Naruto crash right next to them. Lee immediately went to check whether he was all right. To his relief, Naruto was unharmed. Lee asked, "Naruto, why are you here? Also, how did you fly?" Naruto muttered, "That's embarrassing. I'll tell you another day." He looked at Guy and said, "Fujin said that I need to improve my control over my body and increase my speed." He became speechless at the massive grin that appeared on Guy's face. He shouted, "Very good. Fujin sent you to the right perso." "Huh!" Guy turned his head again and saw Konohamaru's group flying towards them. Moments later, they crashed just like Naruto did. Konohamaru got up, dusted himself, and exclaimed, "Incredible! It didn't hurt even a bit." Udon added, "Yeah, I thought we were done for." Neji's eyes twitched as he wondered, what is happening today? Naruto quickly checked up on them and asked, "Why did Fujin send you here?" Mogi answered, "I'm not sure. He said there wasn't any reason for us not to improve our bodies." Her attention went towards Guy, who became very excited. He enthusiastically roared, "They're so full of youth. To come to train at such a time, I'll train everyone. Let your youth explode." The young trio became nervous due to Guy's excitement. Lee became excited as well, while Neji and Tenten couldn't help but feel pity for them. Without asking whether they wanted to train or not, Guy forced Konohamaru, Udan, and Mogi to train alongside Naruto and his students. The guards outside the hospital were startled as Sasuke fell right at the entrance of the hospital. They quickly went to check on him while raising their guard in case it was an attack. They were relieved to see that it was just Sasuke, and he seemed unharmed. Sasuke cursed under his breath, "That bastard! He sent me flying all the way to the hospital without hearing a single word I wanted to say. What's the commotion here?" Sasuke looked back and saw Yamanaka Yoshi standing behind him. Yoshi observed, "Those winds! Was that Fujin's doing? However, this boy looks fine. Why did he send him here?" Sasuke got up and said, "Nothing. Ignore it." He was already embarrassed at being seen by so many people. He didn't want to pile on to his misery. Unfortunately, Yoshi didn't let him leave. He said, "Hold it there, young man. Why did you come flying here? Was it Fujin's work?" Sasuke was surprised that the old man made such an accurate guess. He just nodded, hoping the old man would back off. Unfortunately, Yoshi placed his hand on Sasuke's shoulder and said seriously, "I don't know how he did it, but if Fujin sent you flying here, he must have a reason. Come with me, I'll do a thorough check-up." Sasuke was stunned by the sudden change in Yoshi's behavior. He slapped away Yoshi's hand and said, "I'm all right, old man. Leave me alone." However, Yoshi had no intention of letting such a promising ninja suffer due to his arrogance. He grabbed Sasuke's shoulder again, this time firmly, and showed that his jounin rank wasn't for show. He scolded, "Nonsense! Don't take your health too lightly. It'll only take a few minutes." Against his will, Sasuke was dragged into the Konoha hospital. Yoshi stared thoughtfully at Sasuke, who became a bit concerned. He asked, "Why are you looking at me like this?" Yoshi answered, "Well, your body is all right. There are no physical injuries. However, you seem extremely tense, showing signs of several types of mental traumas." He thought he was subject to more intense genjutsu torture than Kakashi, and it was done by none other than his older brother, the person who slaughtered every ninja in the Uchiha clan along with his parents. So this is inevitable. Even though Lady Tsunade healed him, she can't treat something like this in a short time. Sasuke got off the bed and said, "I told you nothing's wrong with me. I can handle myself." Before he could leave the room, Yoshi shook his head and said, "You're wrong. Though it is often overlooked, the mental health of a ninja is critical considering what we have to go through on a daily basis. If you aren't in the right state of mind, you may make foolish decisions which would not only hurt you but also your close ones." He let out a sigh, and his following words stopped Sasuke in his tracks. Yoshi continued, "Unfortunately, many ninjas ignore it and end up doing something very foolish. Perhaps that may be a reason why your older brother did something as drastic as he did. If his mental state had been checked, he may not have done what he did." Sasuke turned around and shouted, "You don't know anything about Itachi. He's not some victim of his own mind, but a monster, a cold-blooded murderer who slaughtered my clan without a second thought. Don't try to make excuses for him. He's beyond saving." Sasuke completely lost his cool. However, Yoshi wasn't bothered. On the contrary, he understood Sasuke. He nodded and said, "Perhaps that might be the truth. However, I can't take a risk in you doing something like what he did. While I believe you won't do anything to your remaining clanmates, I can't say for sure that you won't do something that'll harm you." His tone became strict as he stated, "Until I approve your discharge, you'll stay admitted to the hospital. If you try to escape, I'll make a few Anbu ninjas watch over you." Sasuke was stunned. He never predicted his trip to Fujin's house would somehow end up in him being admitted again. Before he could burst out again, Yoshi smiled and said, "You don't need to look at this like a chore. I can feel a burning desire from you to get stronger and get your revenge. Once you improve your state of mind and become calm, your strength will improve rapidly. Let me tell you a secret." He got closer to Sasuke and asked in a soft voice, "You know Konoha's sword, Suzuki Fujin, correct?" Confused, Sasuke nodded. Yoshi said, "He visits me every month to get a complete medical checkup, get rid of any hidden stress forming inside his body, and ensure that his mental state is always at its peak." Sasuke was surprised and wondered, "Fujin also visits him?" Yoshi chuckled internally. "Well, he no longer visits every month and has never talked about his state of mind, but Sasuke doesn't need to know that." To strike when the iron was hot, Yoshi quickly added softly, "He also has his students get a similar checkup every month. Your teammate Naruto also comes along with them. I'm sure you must have noticed how rapidly his strength has been growing." Sasuke's eyes widened and he thought, "Naruto also comes here. Why didn't he ever mention it? And why didn't Kakashi arrange the same for us?" Yoshi continued, "I don't know if you know how strong Fujin's students are. I'm not entirely sure myself. However, from what I heard, despite not even being official ninjas yet, they're stronger than every genin who participated in the Chunin exams. So don't worry about wasting time here. It'll absolutely be worth it." Finally, Sasuke relented. Yoshi made the necessary arrangements for him while thinking, young ones, it's so easy to convince them. The only one who was a pain in the ass was Fujin. That brat not only fooled me but made me beg him for years. Even when he accepted my offer, he made me regret that I ever offered to teach him. Yoshi had no idea how strong Fujin's students were. While he knew Naruto's strength grew at an insane rate, it had nothing to do with him. In fact, he was completely amazed by his progress. He just said those things to convince Sasuke to stay voluntarily. Fujin had no idea that his random act ended up causing Sasuke to be admitted once again. If he did, he'd be amazed at how accurate Yoshi's actions were. After all, this was the time when Sasuke was supposed to betray Konoha and go to Orochimaru, the one who had killed their leader in the original story. While Fujin went to work with Tsunade, the entire village was talking about flying ninjas. Unlike Naruto and the kids, who were sent flying through the outskirts of the Konoha to another training ground, Sasuke flew right through the most crowded areas. Too many people had seen him and gossip spread like wildfire. Several ninjas had seen Sasuke flying as well, and they weren't capable enough to connect dots like Jiraiya, so they believed that Sasuke had the ability to fly. The news spread so much that it reached Danzo's ears too. In the root headquarters, Danzo read a report with a puzzled expression. He thought, Uchiha Sasuke learned how to fly, and he flew across the village to the hospital. Danzo recalled everything he knew about Sasuke. He couldn't remember anything related to him working on a technique to fly. So Danzo couldn't understand how he learned something so complicated. Danzo analyzed, the ability to fly isn't very rare. Quite a few have succeeded in doing so, most notably the second and third Tsuchikage. However, no one has been able to make a technique that allows hundreds of ninjas to fly, other than those buffoons. If Uchiha Sasuke's technique can be used by others, Konoha's strength will increase by a huge degree. Danzo was tempted to find Sasuke and get the technique from him. However, recalling Itachi's recent visit to Konoha, he dropped any ideas he had. Not to mention, Sasuke was Kakashi's student, someone who was famous for copying jutsus. If the technique could be used liberally, then Kakashi would coordinate with Tsunade to spread the technique among other Konoha ninjas. It was difficult for Danzo to make a political comeback using this matter without making some shady moves, a path cut off by Itachi. Danzo decided, I'll ignore it, something about this feels off. There's no need to attract negative light at this time. As long as I stay patient, I'll have my chance to turn things around. Unaware of such happenings, Fujin spent the entire day with Tsunade again, improving his understanding of the soul further. Tsunade succeeded in healing the prisoner's soul to the state she wanted. She handed him to a couple of medical ninjas to be kept under observation. Fujin slashed the soul of another prisoner and she started healing it. The next day, before he and Tsunade could start their experiments, they were called by Shikaku. A team had arrived from Sunagakyo, led by Tenma, Arisa, and Yura. They were welcomed by a team led by none other than Hachike Kakashi, unnerving them a bit. Yura thought, to send Kakashi to receive us, they must be on guard against us pulling off a strange move. As they walked to the Hokage building, they attracted hateful gazes from Konoha ninjas and citizens, increasing the pressure on them further. The gazes finally stopped once they entered the Hokage building. The remaining members stayed behind as Kakashi led Yura and Arisa to the Hokage's office. As she followed Kakashi, Arisa thought, truly mending ties with Konoha will take a lot of time and effort. Their people still hate us due to our attack. That said, I'm not sure if the council truly is interested in it. As long as Konoha doesn't attack us until we recover our strength, it'll be good enough. Her thoughts froze as she stepped into the Hokage's office. In the office were the two elders of Konoha, Hamura and Koharu, along with 3 clan leaders, Shikaku, Hayashi, and Shibai. However, they weren't the ones who terrified her. Sitting in the Hokage seat was Tsunade, the slug princess, her eyes staring at the 2 Sooner elite jounins. Standing behind her was Jiraiya the gallant, with a smile on his face. And standing on one side of the room with his back leaning against the wall was the Sand Slayer, Suzuki Fujin, his eyes watching their every move closely. If either of them made one false move, they didn't doubt that their heads would roll in the blink of an eye. Despite all their experience, rank, and status, Arisa and Yura lost composure for a moment. The sight was just too terrifying. Even so, they quickly gathered themselves and hid their feelings. Of course, everyone in the room had already noticed the change in their expression. Jiraiya thought, not bad, they controlled themselves in under a second. Arisa and Yura respectfully greeted Lady Tsunade, Lord Jiraiya. At the same time, Yura analyzed, our fears were true. Tsunade has returned to Konoha too. If we hadn't agreed on a peace agreement, we would have to face Fujin, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Kakashi on the battlefield. Just Fujin alone gave us countless headaches. The council had no confidence in our famed desert guerrilla tactics against his army, and our formations were a complete mess as a result of the confusion. If these three had also joined, Yura understood how disastrous a war would have been. While there were several other factors, there was no doubt in his heart that Sunagakure would have taken a brutal beating at the start of the war. Unlike Yura, who thought of the past, Arisa focused on the present. She analyzed, Tsunade is sitting on the Hokage seat. She should be the fifth Hokage, unless this is some sort of trickery, though I can't think of a reason why Konoha would do that. More importantly, the third Hokage isn't here. There was no doubt in Arisa's mind that this was a power play by Konoha. There was no need to have the Sanins and Fujin in the room otherwise. Just one of the three would suffice. Arisa concluded, the reports from our spies are true. The third Hokage has made no public appearances since the end of the war. His injuries must be severe. For Sunagakure, this was good news. If Hiruzen had been hale and hearty, Konoha would be too powerful. It wasn't merely his strength, but the fact that he had been leading Konoha's forces for nearly half a century. His presence alone was a huge morale boost for Konoha forces. Even if he didn't go to the battlefield, Hiruzen's presence inside Konoha was good enough to assure all Konoha ninjas that their loved ones in the village would stay safe, something he proved once again when Orochimaru attacked Konoha. So, if he were severely injured or crippled, Konoha would lose more than just a rank S ninja. Arisa glanced towards Fujin for a moment before turning her gaze back to Tsunade. She thought, no, it won't affect their morale much. Their situation isn't like ours. The third Hokage's fall coincided with Fujin's sharp rise. As long as he doesn't fall like the fourth Hokage, Konoha ninjas will revolve around him. Seeing how much power he has been given after our war, this must be Konoha's intention. Perhaps for all common people and most ninjas, nothing will change. They'll just assume that Fujin stepped into the third Hokage's role. Of course, that isn't entirely accurate. Arisa wasn't a normal ninja, she was a military strategist. She saw things differently as compared to others. For other people, Konoha's top leadership simply changed from Hiruzen, Jiraiya, and Tsunade to Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Fujin. It didn't affect their daily lives as Konoha maintained the same deterrence level. However, Arisa knew that Konoha was far deadlier earlier. Just because no one knew how strong Fujin truly was didn't mean that he wasn't that strong. On the contrary, that made him a far bigger threat than even Hiruzen, and the Sanins as no strategist could make appropriate plans for him. In addition, Hiruzen's strength hadn't degraded as much as others believed. Arisa thought, these two factors were so big that they messed up all of Orochimaru's calculations and caused him such a heavy defeat, but now everyone knows how strong Fujin is. And the third Hokage's strength will definitely degrade further, though we can't be sure how much. Even though nothing seems to have changed, Konoha lost two big hidden cards. They'll have a difficult time replicating such a performance again. That said, Arisa felt helpless. While this information was critical, it hadn't come for free. Sunagakure had paid a terrifying price, be it in manpower, economy, or political power. They couldn't do anything with this information. Even selling it was pointless, as the other hidden villages couldn't do anything either, and hence wouldn't be willing to pay a substantial amount for the information. Arisa thought, by the time we or anyone else could do anything, who knows how many new hidden cards Konoha would have developed. Even if they don't, the mere prospect of Fujin maturing over the next 5 years is terrifying. Even though the two Sunagakure council members thought and analyzed so much, it happened very quickly. Tsunade gained their attention, asking, I believe you have brought everything as per the agreement. Am I correct? Yura immediately replied and handed several storage scrolls. Shikaku had a few Ambu ninjas accept them and check their belongings after leaving the room and entering safe rooms. Needless to say, they used shadow clones to avoid any loss of life in case Sunagakure did something as absurd as setting traps in them. Just one scroll still remained with Yura. He placed it on the desk and said, this scroll contains 1,000 wind crystals, 250 fire crystals, and 250 earth crystals. The price for the information related to Lord Third Kazekge's disappearance. Shikaku glanced at Fujin, who created a shadow clone which took the scroll and disappeared from the room. A minute later, Fujin received the memories and nodded. Shikaku handed Yura a scroll. He immediately opened it and read it along with Arisa. Their eyes immediately widened in horror. Arisa muttered in shock, Sasori did it! Others in the room were keenly watching them. Other than Fujin, Shikaku, Jiraiya, and Tsunade, no one knew what was in the scroll. While it would be discussed in the council later, they were curious to know. Needless to say, all of them were surprised as well. Hamura thought so it was one of them after all, yet they blamed us and started a stupid war. Arisa glanced at Fujin and asked, her voice quivering, is everything here true? Did he have Lord Third's human puppet that can use magnet release? Fujin nodded without entertaining her much. It was very easy for someone like her to understand the importance of this information. Fujin didn't need to emphasize it. Besides, it wasn't like Sunagakyo would pay more if he provided a detailed analysis. Arisa bitterly thought, what a bloody mess. There were some murmurs about getting Sasori back and appointing him the next Kazekage. Though it was highly unlikely to make him the 5th Kazekage, the council would have been willing to pay any price to make him come back to the village, Arisa sighed. While Fujin's information had saved them from a huge headache, it created more headaches too. Other than Chiyo, Sasori was the only rank S ninja who grew up in Sunagakyo. Until new rank S ninjas rose from the younger generations, Sunagakyo wouldn't have an active rank S ninja. Not to mention, Chiyo's reputation would fall heavily due to her grandson's actions. She'd be unable to help much in restoring their strength if everyone looked at her with suspicion. Worse, there will be distrust among the Sunagakyo ranks, especially toward the puppeteers. However, it showed that Sunagakyo needed to take the security of their cage way more seriously. Arisa said, "Thank you for the information. It is worth the price. Please don't take this as me being impolite, but this is very important for my village. Do you have any hard evidence to prove this?" Fujin raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do you expect me to provide you with the human puppet of the 3rd Kazekage? Just find Sasori and beat him up until he is forced to use this card." Fujin shrugged. Arisa wasn't surprised by his response. Yet she sighed and muttered, "Understandable, I apologize. Could you tell us the other 6 rank S ninjas you fought alongside Sasori?" A smile appeared on Fujin's face as he answered, "Sure, if you can afford it. Don't expect a discount this time, as I don't think this information is essential for Sunagakyo's survival." Arisa felt awkward while Shikaku shook his head and thought, "We've already squeezed them all we could. They can't pay any more. A shame, it could have been interesting to watch." With Fujin in no mood to do charity, Arisa and Yura could only continue with their task. They handled most of their official duties before being led back by Kakashi to wait until the Anbu were done checking all the remaining scrolls. In the Hokage office, Tsunade muttered, "They were very cooperative. I didn't think I'd see Sunagakyo be so humble." Jiraiya chuckled. "It just shows how catastrophic their losses were." Tsunade nodded. Sunagakyo's position wasn't something anyone would envy. They were unlikely to be a threat for several years. Koharu suddenly said, "This is the first time someone made a deal that benefits just a single person instead of the village." Everyone's attention turned towards Fujin. Shikaku sighed internally. Does she need to keep poking him? Fujin was surprised as well. He didn't expect to be attacked without any provocation. He glanced back at Koharu and asked, "Really? I need to check our former agreements once. Besides, what do you mean by not benefiting the village? If not for me, you'd have settled for 1/3 of what Sunagakyo paid the village today." The only reason why Sunagakyo agreed to such terms was that Fujin marched on their country. Konoha had already benefited a lot due to Fujin, be it from Sunagakyo's reparations or Kusagakyo's mission. Everyone in the council was aware of this. Of course, that wasn't enough to make Koharu back down. Her discussion with Danzo had alarmed her way too much. She shook her head and said, "Those two matters are different. Doing what you're now will set a dangerous precedent. It'll be problematic for the village in the future if everyone selfishly just thinks of them instead of the village." Fujin replied, "The only thing that is dangerous is the inability of some people to focus on the larger picture and compete within our ranks while missing out on more gains for the village. If your vision is so narrow, Elder Koharu, I'd recommend you resign from your seat on the council." Fujin's words were just as merciless as Koharu's. While Koharu targeted his nature, he targeted her competence. As someone who had been an elder for so long, Koharu was immediately offended. She icily asked, "What do you mean?" Fujin ignored her, turned his gaze towards Shikaku and asked, "Do we have any underground means of contacting Kumagakyo and Iwagakyo?" Shikaku nodded. They had been created and maintained by Danzo, and they later fell into Shikaku's hands. Fujin said, "Good, sell them this information. Set the price at minimum 1,000 elemental crystals of any element so that they don't think it's fake. Sell the information regarding the 3rd Kazekige's death to Iwagakyo and Kumagakyo." Hayashi was intrigued. He analyzed for a few moments and realized, yeah, why not? Even though this has nothing to do with them, they would be curious to know how someone that strong suddenly went missing. To ensure nothing similar happens to their cage, they'd be willing to spend a fortune. The information isn't useless either, as they'll take Sasori way more seriously. To think he not only killed the 3rd Kazekage, but transformed him into a human puppet that can use the magnet release. After Orochimaru's Edo Tensei, he may be the greatest threat. Hayashi understood how troublesome it would be if Sasori could transform a few more Kekkei Genkai users into human puppets. So did the rest. Shikaku thought, "I had the same thought, but I didn't think he'd recommend it himself." Shibai said. "Before you sell the information further, I think it's time that the council is made aware of the developments too." While Shibai didn't mind Fujin keeping it a secret until he got paid, not informing the council properly any further was insulting. Fujin casually replied, "There isn't much. I'm sure you've guessed most of it by now. My army ran into Sasori and Deidara in the land of rice. During our battle, he used the third Keizuki's human puppet. The rest is just our speculation." "So you did run into Akatsuki," Hamura exclaimed. He quickly added, "The mission reports didn't say anything about it." Fujin nodded. "It was quite unexpected. I also gained a lot of information other than the third Keizuki, though we aren't completely sure of it. But if our fears are true, we may have a hidden danger." The mood in the room changed. Koharu's words were completely ignored by everyone. While it was true that no one ever made such deals to gain personal benefits as Fujin did, deals were frequently made by clans, even the smaller ones. Considering the youngsters living in Fujin's compounds, his actions could also be interpreted as him looking out for them. Koharu understood this as well. She was merely fishing for trouble due to her conversation with Danzo. With no one backing her and everyone focusing on the new information, she stopped pushing. Instead, she asked, "How long will you be keeping secrets from the council? If something that important happened, the council should be informed immediately." Fujin didn't reply and instead looked at Shikaku. Shikaku sighed and muttered, "I wanted to wait until Lord Third woke up. However, it looks like that will take some time. All right, let's convene a council meeting immediately. I could use some help in handling this matter." With Kakashi keeping an eye on the Sunagakure ninjas, they didn't have much reason to worry. They left Eagle in charge of confirming the contents of the storage scroll while the council members gathered in the council room. Tsunade occupied Hiruzen's seat while Jirya grabbed a seat as well. Of course, the civilian members weren't informed about the meeting. Fujin informed the council about his clash with Sasori and Deidara along with his discoveries about the third Keizuki. Inoichi grumbled, "Sasori, he seems almost as troublesome as Orochimaru." Choza asked, "How did the battle end? Did they escape?" Fujin replied, "Not quite. Another Akatsuki member interfered. I believe he may have been the one behind the Nine Tails incident years ago." Other than Tsunade and Jirya, who were already briefed by Shikaku, every single council member was shocked. No one expected Fujin to solve one, let alone two major mysteries. The ones who were most shocked were the two elders. Hamura thought, "Wasn't it the Uchiha clan?" Koharu wondered, "Were we mistaken? Was it outside interference all along?" However, who could be strong enough to defeat Minato and control the Nine Tails? Fujin passed the same information to the council that he did to Shikaku, connecting the dots as he spoke. Even though there wasn't any solid evidence, every single member of the council was convinced that Fujin's analysis was accurate. While Fujin spoke, Shikaku subtly observed Koharu and Hamura. He had a strong hunch that the elders had something to do with the Uchiha massacre. He wanted to see if their expressions would change on realizing that they had wrongly targeted the Uchiha clan. Unfortunately, he was left disappointed. Koharu and Hamura had excellent control over their expressions. They didn't give a single clue to Shikaku. Of course, while they maintained perfect control of their expressions, their inner minds were a mess. Hamura thought, as we suspected, it was a Uchiha. However, he shouldn't have anything to do with the Uchiha clan or Itachi wouldn't have succeeded. We wrongly judged the Uchiha clan. Hamura sighed internally. Koharu felt the same. Their misjudgment had proved to be extremely costly for Konoha. Konoha lost their strongest clan, a rank S ninja, and two extremely promising young ninjas who became rank S ninjas in their teens due to that debacle. Hamura and Koharu didn't dare to speak out aloud. However, others weren't shy. Tsum directly said, "The Uchiha clan was mistreated wrongly." Everyone in the room knew that the Uchiha clan had been relocated to the outskirts of the village and monitored all the time for years. Their discontent now seemed justified. Their gazes turned towards the two elders who were among the decision-makers to implement that. Hamura sighed and muttered, "The Uchiha clan was schemed against. He acted in such a way that all suspicions led to the Uchiha clan. The thought of such a terrifying Uchiha living outside Konoha didn't even cross our mind. The Uchiha clan should be unaware as well." Koharu immediately added, "Considering that Itachi joined the Akatsuki after massacring the Uchiha clan, this masked ninja may have played a role in the massacre as well. However, it is difficult to say whether he actively participated or just manipulated young Itachi." Fujin glanced at the two old schemers and thought, as expected of these geezers, they immediately diverted the blame towards Albedo and the Akatsuki. No one would even suspect them because of how absurd the order given to Itachi was. Hayashi said, "There's nothing we can do about the past. We need to focus on the future." This mysterious Uchiha and the Akatsuki pose a grave threat to our village. If he can really use Izanagi on top of having such a powerful space-time ninjutsu, he's a grave threat to every Konoha ninja. I doubt our clans would fare any better than the Uchiha if they target other clans. Hayashi's words brought everyone back to a bitter truth. They couldn't ensure their safety. Other than Fujin, only Tsunade and Jiraiya had confidence in surviving Obaido's attack. The clan leaders would be completely helpless. They could only find solace in the fact that he hadn't made a direct move for over a decade. Inoichi asked, "Did you think of any counters for him, Shikaku?" Shikaku sighed and answered, "It is difficult. I have never heard of such an ability. Oh, I have thought of several countermeasures. None is foolproof. We can't even bait him to eliminate him due to how slippery his ability is." He paused and looked around the room before adding, "I was hoping Lord Third could think of something. However, since he hasn't woken up yet, I hope some of you can give me better ideas." The council meeting suddenly turned into a brainstorming session where new and unique ideas were put forth to target Obaido. Unfortunately, Fujin shot most of them down. The ones he didn't were shot down by others before he had a chance to say anything. They were either not comprehensive enough, implementable, or couldn't be implanted over a large scale. In the end, they couldn't decide on any good idea despite spending several hours. Fujin wasn't really surprised. They had minimal information on Obaido's ability, and his ability was truly broken. Jiraiya shook his head and said, "We'll just have to wait until Sensei wakes up." Tsunade sighed and added, "This ability is too strange to become intangible for a long time. I doubt Sensei has a way either." No one opposed her. The only way they could agree on was to kill Obaido before he targeted them. Unfortunately, that wasn't a cakewalk either. Suddenly, Fujin said, "Well, if we can't do anything about him, we can only hope others can do so." Tsum asked, "Others? Who do you mean?" Shikaku's eyes twitched as he muttered, "Don't tell me." The entire council was left dumbfounded as Fujin chuckled and said, "Yeah, let us sell this information too." "Yeah, let us sell this information too." The entire council looked at Fujin weirdly. Other than Shikaku, not a single person expected Fujin to say something like this. Even Tsunade and Jiraiya looked at Fujin in a new light. Fujin explained, "Kumagakure and Iwagakure will pay a high price to learn about a threat that could kill their cage or kidnap their Jinchuriki. We could even blame him for kidnapping Han. Even though Sunagakure has been wrung dry, they should still fork up more resources to learn of such a threat. The only disappointment is that it's unlikely for either faction in the Land of Water to pay anything due to their state." None of the council members paid much attention to his words. Once Fujin suggested the idea, they immediately realized the pros and the cons. Their mind was still stuck on how absurd the idea was. Yet somehow it made complete sense. Under normal circumstances, no village would sell information that was this critical. They would instead wait for Obaido to cause some harm to other villages, indirectly making Konoha's position stronger. However, the four great villages didn't pose a threat to Konoha for the time being. None of them were in a position to launch a huge war. Conversely, Akatsuki felt like a greater threat, so it was logical to sell such information despite its absurdity. Understanding the threat such a ninja would pose, Konoha could demand a higher price than the third Kazekage information. It was just that Fujin proposed this idea, someone who hadn't had much exposure to business, as opposed to the clan leaders and elders who handled several financial matters for their respective factions. Tsunade couldn't help but think, "This boy!" His thought process is completely different from that of a normal youngster. What did he go through to find opportunities in such vague and unrelated matters? No, that's not what this weird feeling is. I understand now. He's treating these deals as a way to extort resources from other villages. He's a few steps ahead of Sensei in this aspect, though I can't say whether it is a good thing. Jiraiya noticed the same thing, while the remaining council members got a glimpse of what evoked Hiruzen's interest in Fujin. Shikaku thought, "I had heard tales of him extorting the old man during graduation and his Chunin exams. No wonder he pushed so much to bring Fujin into the council and on negotiation teams. He just wanted other villages to experience what he had to." For a moment, Shikaku was worried that the next great war might start when Fujin overdid on such matters. He could only pray that he'd be retired from official duty by then. Hiramasa suddenly chuckled and said, "Not bad. What we received from Kusagakure and Sunagakure is already enough to recover from our losses. If we can make Iwagakure and Kumagakure pay a heavy price, it'll be a good boost to help us improve our forces to the next level." With Hiramasa breaking the ice, several others chuckled as well. Tsum said, "Indeed, this is a good idea." Inoichi added, "We must make this a high priority." Hayashi replied, "I agree, but we shouldn't be impatient. Otherwise, they'll suspect something fishy and may not be prepared to pay a high price. We need to first build trust by selling the third Kazekage intel." The entire council, consisting of several respected people, began discussing how to extract the maximum price from other villages like a group of bandits. Suddenly, Koharu coughed and said, "You are putting the cart in front of the horse." Everyone's gaze turned towards her. She looked at Fujin and said, "You took all the elemental crystals Sunagakure gave in exchange for the information about the third Keizukage. Do you want to do the same again?" Fujin thought, "Well, I wasn't planning to take any, but if she is asking me so kindly, refusing would be rather impolite." Luckily or unluckily for Koharu, Tsume spoke before Fujin could open his mouth. "That wouldn't be appropriate. The deal with Sunagakure is a different matter." Fujin's actions were the reason why they capitulated so easily. The deal related to the third Keizukage was just a cherry on top. We can't treat every case similarly. The more appropriate action would be to give him 25%, as we do when a clan contributes majorly to a particular task. Tsume wasn't present in the Hokage office when Koharu tried to lecture Fujin for being greedy, so she didn't know Koharu's intentions and assumed that Koharu wanted Fujin to get a fair share since nearly all the work had been done by him. Of course, it was strange to see Koharu looking after Fujin despite their disagreements in Fire Capital, but Tsume had seen stranger things. In politics, benefits frequently outweighed petty squabbles. Quite often, council members who were on the opposite sides joined hands if both their factions benefited. Tsume merely assumed that this was one of those cases. She didn't want the Inuzuka clan to lose out on their share of the fortune Konoha was about to earn. Since the other clans would have similar thoughts, Tsume wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Koharu immediately understood. "She misunderstood me," Koharu quickly said. "However, he is only one ninja." Koharu wanted to say that Fujin was alone without any clan. As such, he shouldn't be treated as a clan and the benefits he got should be substantially lower. Unfortunately, she was cut off by Inoichi, who said, "That's incorrect. He is looking after over 100 orphans from the Land of Water. In the future, they'll be a huge part of our Anbu. Even though it isn't official like the clans, it is more or less a faction and Fujin is the de facto leader." Much like Tsume, he was afraid Koharu and Fujin had reached some sort of deal behind the scenes. He didn't even let her make an argument. Koharu wanted to respond, but Hiramasa said, "Actually, that's not completely fair. The clans, even the smaller ones, get resources from the village every year. Fujin's faction doesn't receive any such budget, though the kids are being trained by the Anbu trainers. To make things fair, we should give Fujin a bigger share of this deal or assign his faction resources just like clans get." Without wasting a breath, Inoichi said with a smile, "With the way those kids are growing, the latter is inevitable. We should make it official now." More than the orphans, it was Fujin's growth that was extremely overwhelming. While they would look out for their interests, none of the clan leaders wanted to oppose Fujin if they could avoid doing so. Inoichi knew it was just a matter of time before his faction received a similar status as the ninja clan. In the past, Danzo, Hamura, and Koharu had developed their clans substantially when they gained fame and strength, so he expected Fujin to do the same at some point in the future. The loss of Fujin taking some of their resources was insignificant compared to the gains from selling the information. Inoichi didn't need any time to calculate. Choza nodded. That is reasonable. I agree with Inoichi." Tsume and Hiramasa agreed too, while the rest kept watching the scene in disbelief. The rest had seen Koharu and Fujin clash in the Hokage office. They knew Koharu wanted to ensure that Fujin didn't get anything and not the opposite. Yet, Fujin's faction now somehow had the support of 4 clan leaders. Koharu was completely at a loss of words, while Hamura failed to understand how things reached such a stage. Fujin was surprised as well. He never anticipated such a thing. For once, he was being selfless until Koharu decided to poke him. However, even before he could counter her, Tsume, Inoichi, and Hiramasa worked together to make the village pay him a neat little sum. With a smile on his face, Hiramasa asked, "What do you think, Fujin? Is this acceptable?" Naturally, Fujin didn't have any problem with such a deal. Though he could push for more benefits, it wouldn't have made any difference to him. Besides, he wasn't planning to take anything initially. As such, he could only nod. With him having the support of 4 clan leaders, the remaining 3 had no option but to go along with this arrangement despite knowing what was truly happening. With 7 clan leaders supporting him and Tsunade not showing any opposition, there was nothing Koharu could do or say to clear up the confusion. Hamura looked in confusion as he wondered, what the hell happened here? Over half of the council members watched in confusion as Fujin became the official leader of a new faction in Konoha and gained a clan-like status. Due to a variety of reasons, none of them could step in and put a stop to it. In the end, they could only accept it. Fujin looked at Koharu thinking, I misjudged her. She isn't as magnanimous as Hiruzen or Sasori, but she isn't too bad either. I still recall how adamantly Hiruzen denied my request to get elemental crystals for the orphans or other civilian ninjas. The only way they could have access to them was through the Anbu. However, Koharu sidestepped him with such ease, as expected of an experienced politician, seeing Fujin smiling at her annoyed Koharu even further. Unfortunately, she could only swallow her rage and regret how she had framed her question. The council discussed how to sell the information to Iwagakure, Kumagakure, and even Sunagakure before discussing other general matters. After the meeting, Fujin and Tsunade returned to the torture and interrogation department and continued their experiments. Over the course of the next week, Tsunade healed the souls of 3 more prisoners. During this time, Guy trained Naruto, Konohamaru, Udan, and Mogi along with his students. Needless to say, the 3 kids regretted following Naruto towards Fujin's house. Initially, Naruto struggled as well, but thanks to his unique physique, he quickly adjusted to it and experienced small but noticeable gains in no time. As for Sasuke, Yoshi kept him in the hospital, worrying the remaining Uchiha orphans once again. In the torture and interrogation department, Tsunade sighed tiredly. Finally, it's done! Fujin nodded, thinking, impressive. All 4 souls were healed accurately as per her plans without causing any further harm. In addition, she improved considerably during the 2nd and 3rd healing. Though there wasn't much improvement during the 4th healing, it just shows that she has reached close to perfection. There shouldn't be any accidents with Hiruzen. Fujin asked, Is it time to heal the old man, or do you want to improve further? Tsunade replied, Improving any further will be a long process with no end. This is enough. I'll heal Sensei tomorrow. You should come too in case there's any disturbance. Eat a soldier pill as I'll heal him continuously until he wakes up. The only breaks we'll take are the ones his soul needs. Her tone was very serious. Fujin nodded, I'll be there. Early the next morning, Fujin and Tsunade met on the top floor of Konoha Hospital. Due to Fujin's intel about Abaido's abilities, the security had been increased further. Not only had the number of ambush squads increased, but a couple of elite jounins were also stationed permanently. In addition, Jirya also occasionally kept an eye. Entering the room, Tsunade ordered, Until I leave the room, allow no one to enter or even knock on the door. Is that understood? The ambu captains immediately answered, Understood. Tsunade added, Good, secure the perimeter. Everyone flickered out, leaving only Fujin, Tsunade, and Shizune in the room along with the unconscious Hiruzen. Without wasting any time, Tsunade got to work. Outside the room, the people in Konoha continued their work as usual. However, everyone could feel a sense of unease, as if the air had been oppressive. Sasuke, who was a few floors below Hiruzen's room, wondered, What is happening today? Why are there so many Anbu ninjas monitoring the area? Since Hiruzen was being healed, and Tsunade didn't want any disturbances, the entire village was on high alert. While most didn't know what was happening, Shikaku had deployed thousands of ninjas, including Jirya, to ensure nothing unexpected happened. Fortunately, there were no accidents. Tsunade healed Hiruzen for an entire day with just 2 breaks to allow Hiruzen's soul to adjust. Wiping off the sweat on her forehead, she placed her palm on Hiruzen's chest. Shizune and Fujin carefully watched as they understood that she was almost done. As her chakra entered Hiruzen's body, his eyes suddenly snapped open. His eyes landed on Tsunade and a weak smile appeared on his lips. Tsunade breathed a sigh of relief. The process had been a success. Looking at Hiruzen, Tsunade muttered, You went too far this time, sensei. Hiruzen sat up with Shizune's help and replied with a chuckle, Unfortunately, I'm no longer young. I could only place my trust in your abilities. Since I have regained consciousness, I was right to do so. Tsunade's expression dulled as she said, Stop putting up a strong front. You know you haven't recovered entirely. Only 20% of your soul was left. Even with my skills, your soul could only recover to 33%. Recovering it any further will take a lot of time. Tsunade sighed. Though Hiruzen put up a brave face, everyone in the room knew how much pain he was bearing at that moment. Orochimaru, who was merely missing his arms, suffered tremendously. The pain Hiruzen was experiencing couldn't be put into words. Hiruzen smiled again and said, It's fine. Being alive after summoning the god of death is good enough. He turned his gaze towards Fujin and teased, I didn't expect to see you so surprised. Didn't expect my old bones to survive. Fujin replied, No, I knew you'd wake up. It's just that I overheard Shikaku-san saying that you won't wake up until someone becomes the 5th Hokage. I didn't expect him to be wrong. Fujin's words stunned the 3 ninjas in the room, especially Hiruzen, who was so surprised that he missed a breath and began coughing violently. Tsunade and Shizune immediately helped him while glaring at Fujin. Tsunade scolded, Fujin, now is not the time for Joe. Before she could complete her sentence, Hiruzen asked while breathing deeply, "What do you mean? Has the fifth Hokage not been appointed yet?" Tsunade and Shizune were left speechless by Hiruzen's worries. The old man was more worried about being forced to take the reins again than about his fragile soul and health. They had a feeling that Hiruzen would refuse to ever leave this room if the next Hokage wasn't appointed. Shizune quickly said, "Lord Third, don't worry. Lady Tsunade has accepted the position of the fifth Hokage." Fujin chuckled and added, "And Shikaku has been the acting Hokage in your absence, so you can relax." Hiruzen was relieved and surprised at the same time. He thought Tsunade returning to the village and accepting responsibility after acting for so long is already a surprise. To think that Shikaku would accept such a troublesome job. "What happened when I was unconscious?" Before he could ask, Tsunade said, "I suppose you're already aware of the consequences of having an injured soul." Hiruzen nodded. "My reserves will fall drastically, and I won't be able to control my chakra as usual. I'll need to train my chakra control again and relearn how to manipulate my chakra with a shattered soul. It's unlikely I'll ever regain my former strength, but I'll relearn the Reaper Death Seal in case Orochimaru attacks us with the Edo Tensei Jutsu again." Tsunade frowned and asked, "You plan on taking a dozen Rank S ninjas simultaneously despite your condition?" Hiruzen chuckled and said, "Don't worry. Even though Orochimaru's Edo Tensei was very formidable, it has one weakness. Summoning more dead ninjas increases the pressure on his soul. He could barely even move. With his soul injured, it is unlikely he'll ever be able to control that many Rank S ninjas simultaneously. As long as his soul doesn't recover completely, we don't need to worry." Fujin asked, "Isn't his knowledge of souls very deep? What are the chances that he heals his soul?" Hiruzen's expression became serious. If Orochimaru regained his strength, Konoha could face another calamity, and Hiruzen wouldn't be able to save Konoha the next time. Hiruzen sighed and answered, "It is difficult. Very difficult. Unfortunately, I can't say for sure. Did he approach you?" Tsunade nodded. "He claimed he had other means to heal himself. However, I don't think they can heal his soul completely. Otherwise, he wouldn't have approached me." Hiruzen agreed. "We can only hope that is the case." Fujin muttered, "Oh well, if luck is with us, he may run into me at some point before he completely recovers. You should rest now, Grandpa. Leave the troubles to us unless you plan on returning back to the Hokage seat." He immediately earned a glare from Hiruzen. Hiruzen warned, "Don't underestimate him just because he is injured. This is a good time to kill him, but he'll fight back with all his hidden cards. We still don't know if he has any more capable subordinates or allies." Tsunade chuckled. "Otagakure is no more and Orochimaru is on the run. I wouldn't be too worried if he runs into Fujin." Surprise appeared on Hiruzen's face again. He asked, "What happened when I was unconscious?" Hiruzen was left in shock when he heard of the various events that had happened. From Kusagakure accepting the most unfair agreement he ever saw, Fujin setting fire to Otagakure and marching on Sunagakure, to solving the long unresolved mysteries surrounding the deaths of Minato and the third Kazekage, Hiruzen didn't anticipate either of those events occurring. What shocked Hiruzen most was that Fujin supposedly killed the masked Uchiha from the Akatsuki. He thought, from his description, he sounds just like the person Itachi mentioned in his first report. Though he didn't know the masked ninja's abilities, Itachi had the same thoughts as Fujin as well. Unfortunately, he mentioned his existence to me after the Uchiha massacre had taken place. It was already too late. More absurdly, he claimed that person was Uchiha Madara. Hiruzen wasn't sure what to make of Itachi's report. Since Itachi didn't report his abilities, his speculations weren't as convincing as Fujin. Since he claimed the masked ninja to be Uchiha Madara, the report lost more credibility in Hiruzen's eyes. Hiruzen thought, even if I somehow entertain the absurd thought of Madara fooling Lord First and somehow surviving till now, how can I even explain Madara being forced to use Izanagi to survive against Fujin? It was not that Hiruzen looked down on Fujin, but Madara's power was too out of the world. Even though he was called the god of shinobi, Hiruzen knew he wouldn't last more than a few minutes against Madara even in his prime. He fully understood how terrifying Madara and Hashirama were, so the thought of Fujin killing Madara was beyond absurd for Hiruzen. So was the thought of Madara rescuing the likes of Sasori and Deidara. Hiruzen analyzed, "While I'm sure he isn't Madara, his ability is extremely peculiar and troublesome. To become intangible at will. Only techniques equivalent to Fujin's wind domain can counter it effectively. The other ways that could allow us to fight him equally should be senjutsu, which increases the ninja's awareness and sensitivity, and other space-time techniques like Sensei's Flying Thunder God." Hiruzen felt a headache. Abaido's ability was just too absurd. Having Izanagi on top of it was simply disgusting. "Are you fine, Lord Third?" Seeing Hiruzen lost in thoughts, Shizune became worried and asked, snapping him out. Hiruzen nodded and said, "I am. You've done an excellent job, Fujin. I couldn't have done it better myself." Fujin chuckled. "Told you not to worry too much." Hiruzen smiled. For a moment he felt joyful that the long hours he put into guiding Fujin were finally showing results. Unfortunately, that feeling lasted just for a fleeting moment as Hiruzen wondered in confusion. "That's strange. Since when did he become so compassionate? Is it because I'm injured or is he playing something?" Hiruzen wanted to believe the answer was the former, but his experiences with Fujin made him more than a bit worried. He could only find relief in the fact that Fujin hadn't put a new problem on his head yet. Even though Hiruzen woke up, his health was still fragile. Tsunade did all she could to help Hiruzen recover as much as he could in a few hours. Thanks to her efforts, Hiruzen was no longer confined to the bed and began walking around. Tsunade finally tasked several veteran medical ninjas to take care of his further treatment. The news of Hiruzen getting better spread through Konoha like wildfire. The entire village rejoiced and celebrations broke out. The celebrations continued into the next day as Tsunade officially accepted the post of the Hokage and was appointed the 5th Hokage. While everyone had heard rumors, the Konoha ninjas were relieved to see it happening officially. Not only was it good for Konoha's leadership, but it also meant the best medical ninja would permanently reside in Konoha. It was a massive boost to their morale. Of course, the one who rejoiced the most was none other than Hiruzen. The hat had finally been passed. The second happiest person was Shikaku, who was forced to be the acting Hokage even after Tsunade returned. While he couldn't retire like Hiruzen, he desperately wanted a complete sleep along with his morning, afternoon, and evening naps. As soon as the ceremony was done, he handed over all the paperwork and other tasks to Tsunade. Tsunade's expression darkened as she noticed his impatience and delight. Shizune awkwardly thought, "It's almost as if he can't wait to run away." Shikaku began leaving when Tsunade suddenly said, "Hold it." Shikaku stopped and asked, "Is there anything else, Lady Tsunade?" Tsunade replied, "There is." She glanced at her ambu guards and ordered, "Activate all the seals. Don't disturb us unless it is something important." The ambu guards followed her command, and within moments the Hokage office was under lockdown, leaving just Tsunade, Shizune, and Shikaku in the room. Before Shikaku could ask anything, Tsunade turned around, sat in her chair, opened a drawer, and withdrew a takuri. Shizune dumbfoundedly wondered, when did lazy Tsunade put alcohol there? Tsunade calmly poured the alcohol into her achoko, looked at Shikaku and said, "Out with it. Tell me about Fujin's mission record and every other crazy thing he did to gain Sensei's interest and trust. Also, tell me why Jiraiya was so reserved while talking about him." Her words immediately piqued Shizune's interest. She thought, the story of the infamous spectral swordsman, this should be entertaining. No wonder she brought out her sake. Unlike Shizune, Shikaku's face fell. He sighed and muttered, "I'll be here all day." Sitting in his basement, Fujin observed several open scrolls in front of him, each containing information about the human soul. Nearly all of the scrolls were handed to him by Tsunade, with the last one being the one where he was writing down his observations and analysis. Fujin studied the information for a long time before letting out a sigh. He thought, no matter what it is, I need a crazy amount of time if I have to become competent in it. Just when I was done with Flying Thunder God, Wind Jutsus, Spirit Transformation Jutsu, Fuin Jutsu, and even the 8 Inner Gates to an extent, and thought I could relax a bit, I am already swamped with so many new projects. I have to recreate the Lightning Chakra mode from the 3rd Reikage scroll I stole from Kumagakyo, and also learn how to infuse more Yang and Yin Chakra into lightning based on his notes and Sakumo's lecture. I'll have to see whether I can do something similar with Wind too. Yin-Yang manipulation goes far deeper than I initially thought. The techniques I saw Hiruzen, Orochimaru, and Sakumo using were far more advanced than mine. I'll have to spend a substantial amount of time to advance my jutsu similarly. Then there's the new stream of Fuin Jutsu that the Jashin followers use. Unfortunately, I haven't had much of a breakthrough there yet. Luckily, I might be able to convince Hiruzen or Tsunade to give me the Edo Tensei Jutsu now. Once I reanimate Ketsuki and read his memories, I should finally have my breakthrough. That said, I feel that mastering it would take even longer than normal Fuin Jutsu. I also have to continue working on recreating Scorch Release. I'm only a step away, but I have been unable to take that final step. Even though I can easily copy its effects, the real deal still evades me. There are still several other ideas that I want to try out. Though they shouldn't take much time individually, combined, they might take the longest. And now I've added Soul to my list. Fuck the elemental crystals, I need time crystals. Fujin was left speechless. The amount of things he wanted to learn to keep improving never seemed to decrease. Fujin sighed once again and thought, I hope nothing serious happens over the next 3 years like in the original story. I need that time. I might need even more. I may have to kidnap a tailed beast or two to delay the fourth war. Anyway, I'll worry about this later. For now, how does Orochimaru split his soul to implant it in his curse seals? Fujin turned his attention back to the scrolls, analyzing what Orochimaru could have done. Though learning how to do it was so far away that Fujin couldn't even consider it, he was interested to see whether he could figure out its principles with his newly acquired knowledge. What did you say? Shizune exclaimed in surprise. Disbelief was visible on Tsunede's face too. Neither could believe Shikaku's words. Shikaku started by telling Tsunade a bit about Fujin's younger days. Tsunade and Shizune listened with interest but were slightly surprised. Shizune thought, that's weird. Seeing what Fujin achieved at such a young age, I thought his talent would be so extreme that it would dwarf Kakashi's talent. However, he was rather ordinary in the academy. Tsunade had a similar thought. He was definitely a genius, but he was more of a normal genius. He wasn't a generational talent like Kakashi or us. He must be like those from the second category, the ones whose talent blooms as they get older and gain more experience. However, Sensei wouldn't pay much attention to such a genius. How did he become so interested in Fujin? Tsunade soon got her answer when Shikaku mentioned what Fujin asked as a reward for ranking first in his class during graduation. Shizune was too stunned to say anything. Tsunade lost her composure and exclaimed, a sword made entirely of chakra metal. Did he want to bankrupt the village? Shikaku chuckled. I don't think he knew its true value. His expression became odd as he muttered, then again, I'm not sure if he'd have changed his request even if he knew. Tsunade was left speechless. She thought, I was right. His absurdity in the council meeting wasn't a one-off incident. His nature is materialistic to the extreme. No, that doesn't sound right. Based on what I saw and heard, he doesn't seem materialistic. On the contrary, he is quite generous, especially with Naruto. However, he definitely gets a kick from forcing such deals. Tsunade zeroed in on understanding Fujin's nature. She felt a headache. Though it wasn't as problematic as Orochimaru's darkness or immoral like Jiraiya's pervertness, it was definitely troublesome. As the Hokage, Tsunade understood she'd have to deal with it. Shizune couldn't think like Tsunade. Instead, she asked curiously, so did Lord Third give him such a sword? Shikaku shook his head. He wasn't aware of all the details, but he knew that Hiruzen had educated Fujin and made him change his request. Tsunade nodded and said, I would have done the same. Shizune glanced at Tsunade and thought, that's assuming you didn't throw him out first. Shikaku continued. After graduating, he was placed under Renjiro's tutelage. Renjiro focused on building his team's basics for a long time before allowing his team to accept the missions. When they finally started, they slaughtered so many bandits that they were known as the bandit exterminators. He mentioned a few incidents that were talked about a lot in the offices in the Hokage building. While they weren't thrilling, Tsunade and Shizune realized, so, this was the groundwork laid for him to hunt down so many ninjas later that he became a legend in the minor villages. Shikaku moved on to the Chunin exams. Tsunade and Shizune once again had odd expressions when they heard Fujin asking for a reward from Hiruzen in front of everyone for creating a new record in the Forest of Death. Tsunade nervously thought, I have to be very careful with my words around this boy. Shit, I hope I haven't made a mistake already. Tsunade had spent a considerable amount of time with Fujin after returning to Konoha. Until Hiruzen recovered, the two were together at all times except for when they slept. She quickly tried to recall whether she had said anything that could result in a headache. Shikaku continued speaking about the final round of the Chunin exams, the teams Fujin was a part of after he became a Chunin, some of his missions, Fujin becoming a seal master in a short time, the death of one of his original teammates, the defeat his team endured when they fell into Kumagakure's trap, and the opportunity he provided Hiruzen. Tsunade sighed, so he has his fair share of losses too. Unfortunate, but this is how this world is. Shikaku continued, fearing Kumagakure's revenge, Lord Third didn't send him on any missions following that and decided to include him in the Anbu. Fujin learnt the mystical palm jutsu during that time and also signed a summoning contract. Once he joined the Anbu, Tsunade and Shizune's interest was piqued once again as they finally reached the fun part. Shikaku recalled several memorable missions that Fujin was a part of. While Hiruzen had known Fujin for a long time, Shikaku had come in contact with him during this period. So he had a lot more to say. Tsunade and Shizune finally understood why Fujin was so feared in the neighboring countries. Shikaku sighed and said, during this period, Fujin killed 793 ninjas, including more than 100 Kirigakure ninjas who were pretending to be rogue. The final tally left Shizune tongue-tied. She thought, no wonder he's so feared. He probably eliminated a squad or two every week, and those villages couldn't even find who was killing them. While Tsunade knew a lot more was to come, Shizune thought Shikaku had already mentioned the most thrilling parts. It was why she couldn't see his next words coming. Shikaku glanced at the ladies and asked, "I am sure the two of you would have heard about the turmoil that happened in the Land of Wind a few years ago, right?" Both nodded. Shizune said, "Yeah, that was strange. Even though we were in a remote town in this country, we heard of a possible civil war breaking out in the Land of Wind due to the fourth Kazekige's actions. Things got so out of control that Sunagakur had to make an official statement to calm down their citizens. They blamed unknown rogue ninjas for disguising themselves as Sunagakur ninjas and causing trouble. When things were threatening to go out of hand, Rasa had to make a statement to transfer blame. While the affected people were suspicious of Rasa's words, the uninvolved people like Tsunade and Shizune believed Sunagakur's statement. It made little sense for Sunagakur to do something like that. Shikaku said, "That's correct. All that was caused by Fujin." "What did you say?" Shizune was caught so off guard that she exclaimed loudly in surprise. Luckily, the seals were activated, otherwise, the Ambu ninjas standing outside would have been shocked by her shout. Disbelief was visible on Tsunade's face too. She couldn't believe Shikaku's words. She immediately asked, "What do you mean? He must have been only 13 back then. Did Sensei send him on such a mission at that young age?" Shikaku nodded. "Yes, he had been sent to the Land of Wind for his Ambu captain promotion mission." Tsunade interrupted Shikaku. "Something doesn't add up. We should have been weak back then, be it the losses of the Nine Tails incident or the Uchiha massacre. Sensei wouldn't make such a risky move at such a time." Shikaku nodded once again. "He didn't." Confusion appeared on Tsunade and Shizune's faces. Neither could understand what Shikaku was implying. Before they could analyze, Shikaku continued, "Our Ambu captain promotion missions used to be kept vague to evaluate the candidate better. Fujin wasn't ordered to do anything so drastic. He just assumed that it was expected of him and did it." Neither knew what to say. Despite having rich experiences and having seen all sorts of tragedies, this was still the most absurd thing Tsunade heard. A 13-year-old ninja nearly started a civil war in one of the 5 major countries merely to ensure he got promoted in the Ambu. Tsunade couldn't wrap her head around this. Despite it being several years and having seen more of Fujin's accomplishments, Shikaku was the same. Even though he understood Fujin far better now, he still couldn't understand how Fujin reached that conclusion. He stayed silent for a few minutes, allowing Tsunade and Shizune to calm down. Finally, Tsunade sighed and said, "All right, tell me what more absurd things he has done. No need to mention any of the routine stuff." Shikaku nodded. "Well, a few months after becoming the Ambu captain, his team ran into an ambush set up by Iwagakure. They wanted to kill a faction in Kusagakure, which was being protected by Fujin's squad. We had anticipated it, which is why his squad was sent. What we didn't anticipate was that Iwagakure would send Roshi." Tsunade became serious. Roshi and Han's tailed beast bombs were a huge threat to her. She couldn't take either of them lightly. Even without transforming into his tailed beast, Roshi was still a formidable ninja. She asked, "How did he get away?" Shikaku answered, "He fought against Roshi, buying time for his team to retreat. The mission was successful, and most of the Iwagakure ninjas were dead. I'm unaware of the details, but he forced Roshi to use the tailed beast bomb and escaped using reverse summoning jutsu."